Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Patricia Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I've seen bear attacks, rescued lost hikers, and pulled bodies from frozen lakes. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. It started on a cold November morning in 1974. The first snow had fallen the night before, covering the Cuyahoga Valley in a thin white blanket. I was drinking coffee in my station when the radio crackled to life. "Ranger Ironwood, we've got hikers reporting something strange near Boston Mills," came the voice of Sheriff Davies. "They say they saw a giant eating a deer, still alive." I set down my coffee. A bear? That's what I figured, but these folks seem pretty shook up. Mind taking a look? I grabbed my gear and headed out. The Boston Mills area was tricky, full of old ruins from when the government bought out all the families back in the 1940s. People called it Helltown now, though that wasn't its real name. Just empty foundations and broken dreams scattered through the woods. The hikers were waiting by the main trail, a young couple from Cleveland. The woman was still crying. "We heard this awful sound," the man said, his hands shaking. Like someone screaming and chewing at the same time. When we looked through the trees, there was this thing, huge. It was bent over a deer, but the deer was still kicking. His girlfriend grabbed my arm. "It wasn't a bear, ma'am. It looked like a person, but wrong. All stretched out and skinny. Its ribs were showing through its skin." I took notes, trying to stay calm. "How big would you say?" "Maybe 12 feet tall when it stood up. It heard us and turned around. Its eyes," she shuddered. "They glowed yellow, like a cat's, but meaner." I'd heard strange stories about these woods before. People always saw things when they got scared or lost. But something about their fear felt real. Real. "Did you see which way it went?" The man pointed deeper into the woods, toward the old government land. "It dragged the deer that way. But ma'am, I don't think you should go alone." I'd been doing this job for over a decade. I had my radio, my .38, and enough wilderness training to handle whatever was out there. At least that's what I told myself. "I'll be careful," I said. "You folks head back to town and file a report with the sheriff." As I watched them leave, I noticed something odd. The woods were quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. No birds singing. No squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I followed their directions through the snow, looking for tracks. It didn't take long to find them. The footprints were huge, at least 18 inches long and shaped like human feet, but with claw marks at the toes. They were deep too, like whatever made them weight a lot more than it should. The trail led to a small clearing where the snow was stained dark red. Bits of fur and bone were scattered around, but there was something else. Chemical smell hanging in the air, sharp and wrong. I pulled out my Geiger counter, part of my standard gear since we were so close to the old government sites. The needle jumped. Not dangerous levels, but higher than normal. Way higher. I knelt down and looked closer at the bones. Some of them had been cracked open, the marrow sucked out. The bite marks were massive, easily 6 inches across. No bear had teeth like that. Nothing did. My radio crackled. "Ironwood, come in." "This is Ironwood. Got another call. Hunting party found about 2 miles south of your position. 3 men. You better get over there." I felt my stomach drop. "What's their condition?" "2 are dead. 1's alive, but he's not making much sense. Keeps talking about being hungry." I packed up my equipment and headed toward the cote, ordinates following a game trail through the bare trees. The Geiger counter kept clicking faster as I got closer to the old government land. Whatever was out here, it wasn't natural, though. Hunting party's camp was a mess. 2 tents torn open, gear scattered everywhere. The sheriff's deputy, Mike Rodriguez, was already there with the surviving hunter. The man was sitting on a log, rocking back and forth. His clothes were torn and bloody, but he didn't seem hurt, just hungry. "Sir?" I approached slowly. "Can you tell me what happened?" He looked up at me with wild eyes. "It talked to us. Said we looked tasty. Jim tried to run, but it caught him. Started eating his arm while he was still breathing. Then Pete grabbed his rifle, but the thing just laughed." "What did it look like?" "Tall as a tree, skinny, like it hadn't eaten in years, but its belly was swollen, ribs poking out everywhere. Its face..." He shook his head. "Looked human, but the mouth was too big, full of teeth like broken glass." The deputy motioned me aside. "Found the other two about 50 yards that way. You don't want to see what's left of them." But I did look. I had to. Part of my job was knowing what I was dealing with. I wished I hadn't. The bodies were only half there. The missing parts hadn't been cut away. They'd been torn off and eaten, raw. The bones were cracked open, just like the deer. But worse were the bite marks. They were on places that should have been impossible to reach while the men were alive. "Deputy Rodriguez," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to call the state police, maybe the FBI. This isn't a normal animal attack." "Already did. But Ironwood..." He looked nervous. "Got a call about 20 minutes ago. Federal agents are coming to take over. Said this was a matter of national security." National security? For an animal attack? I looked back at the surviving hunter. He was gnawing on a stick now, chewing it like he was trying to eat it. His teeth were bloody. "How long has he been doing that?" "Since we found him. Won't stop. Keeps saying he's hungry, but he won't touch the food we brought." The Geiger counter in my hand was clicking steadily now. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about a dangerous animal. There was something bigger going on, something the government didn't want people to know about. As I stood there in the cold woods, looking at what was left of 3 men who just wanted to hunt deer, I realized my world was about to change forever. I'd always trusted the system I worked for, always believed the government protected people like me. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. By evening, the federal agents had arrived. 3 men in dark suits who looked like they'd never set foot in the woods before. They flashed badges too fast to read and told everyone to clear out. "This is a contamination zone," the lead agent said. His name tag read Morrison. "Possible chemical spill from old military exercises. We'll handle it from here." Sheriff Davies tried to argue, but they had paperwork. Official orders. The kind that made local law enforcement back down fast. I should have left with the others. Should have gone home to my cabin and let the feds handle whatever this was. But 11 years as a ranger had taught me one thing. When people in suits show up and start using words like classified and national security, somebody's trying to hide something. I waited until dark, then went back. The woods felt different at night, colder. The snow crunched under my boots like broken bones. I had my flashlight, but I kept it off. The moon was bright enough to see by, and I didn't want to advertise my presence. The federal vehicles were parked near the old Boston Mills ruins. I could see lights moving through the trees, flashlights, and something brighter. Floodlights, maybe. They were setting up some kind of operation. I worked my way closer, staying low. Through the bare branches, I could see men in hazmat suits carrying equipment, not the kind of gear you'd use for a wild animal. This looked like a cleanup operation. "Readings are off the charts near the old lab site," one of them was saying into a radio. "Whatever got out, it's been feeding for a while." Got out? Got out of what? I crept closer, using an old concrete foundation for cover. There were more agents than I'd thought. At least a dozen, maybe more. They had military-grade equipment, the kind I'd seen in Vietnam newsreels. "Dr. Kane was right," another voice said. "The subject has increased in mass significantly since the initial breach. Estimate current weight at over 800 pounds. Subject? These weren't talking about a bear or even a regular animal. They were talking about something they'd made. My hand found the Geiger counter on my belt. I turned it on, keeping the speaker low. The clicking was so fast it almost sounded like static. Whatever had contaminated this area, it was bad. Really bad. A scream echoed through the woods. Not human. Not animal either. something in between. Like a person trying to howl, but having the wrong kind of throat. It was coming from deeper in the woods, past the old government buildings. The federal agents went quiet. Then someone started shouting orders. Containment Team Alpha, move to Sector 7. Tranq rounds only. Do not engage with lethal force unless absolutely necessary. Tranq rounds. They were trying to capture whatever was out there, not kill it. That scared me more than anything else so far. I backed away from the ruins and circled around trying to get ahead of the containment team. If there really was some kind of government experiment loose in these woods, I needed to see it for myself. People had a right to know. The screaming came again, closer this time. Whatever it was moving fast. I found a good hiding spot behind a fallen tree and waited. The containment team came through about 5 minutes later. 6 men in full combat gear, carrying weapons I didn't recognize. They moved like soldiers, not scientists. They'd be gone maybe 10 minutes when I heard the screaming again. But this time it was followed by human voices, shouting, then gunfire. A lot of gunfire. When the shooting stopped, the woods went quiet again, too quiet. Even the wind had died down. I waited another 10 minutes, then followed the sound of the gunshots. What I found made my blood turn cold. The containment team was scattered across a small clearing. 3 of them were dead. Not just dead, but torn apart. The other 3 were nowhere to be seen. Their equipment was scattered everywhere, most of it broken or covered in something dark and sticky. But it was the tracks that really got to me. The same 18-inch footprints I'd seen before, but there were dozens of them now. Whatever had done this had moved around the clearing like it was playing with the soldiers. I knelt down next to one of the bodies. The man's rifle was bent in half. Not broken, bent, like someone had folded it like a pretzel. There were bite marks on his helmet, through the metal. My radio crackled softly. I'd forgotten I still had it on. Alpha Team, come in. Alpha Team, respond. No answer. Bravo Team, move to Sector 7. Alpha Team is not responding. More soldiers were coming. I needed to get out of there, but something caught my eye. One of the dead soldiers had a folder in his pack. Military documents. I grabbed it and ran. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone else, but I could hear vehicles moving through the woods. Lots of them. Whatever was happening here, the government was throwing serious resources at it. Back at my cabin, I spread the documents out on my kitchen table. Most of it was too technical for me to understand, but some things were clear enough. Project Wendigo, Classification Level 5. Subject 7, Status, Containment Breach. Chemical Enhancement, Compound W74. Biological Modification, Successful. Hunger Enhancement, 400% increase. Aggression Levels, Extreme. There were photos too, blurry shots of something in a laboratory, something tall and thin and wrong. Its ribs showed through gray skin, and its mouth was full of teeth that looked like they'd been sharpened to points. The last page was a report dated 3 days ago. Subject 7 breached containment during transport to disposal site. Estimated to have consumed 47 pounds of organic matter in first 24 hours post-breach. Hunger levels increasing exponentially. Recommend immediate termination. Note: subject shows unusual intelligence and adaptability. Previous attempts at termination have failed. Request permission to use experimental neutralization agent 279. I sat back in my chair trying to process what I was reading. The government had created something, some kind of monster that was always hungry, and now it was loose in my woods, eating people. The phone rang, making me jump. I almost didn't answer it, but it might be important. Ironwood. Patricia? It was Sheriff Davies. He sounded scared. You need to get down here, now. What's wrong? That hunter we found this morning, the survivor, he's eaten 3 people. My blood went cold. What do you mean, eaten? I mean he bit through Deputy Johnson's neck and started feeding. Took 4 of us to subdue him. Patricia, his teeth, they're different now. Sharper. and he won't stop talking about how hungry he is. I looked down at the documents on my table. Chemical enhancement. Hunger enhancement. Whatever they'd created was contagious. I drove to the sheriff's station with my .38 loaded and ready. The documents were locked in my truck's glove box, but the images from those photos wouldn't leave my head. That thing in the lab, Subject 7, was loose in the woods, and now it seemed like its hunger was spreading to other people. The sheriff's station was chaos. 3 patrol cars out front, an ambulance, and people standing around looking shocked and scared. I could hear shouting from inside. Sheriff Davies met me at the door. His uniform was torn and bloody. "Thank God you're here, Patricia. We've got a real problem." "Where is he now?" "Locked in the holding cell." "But Patricia..." He lowered his voice. He bent the bars. Just grabbed them and bent them like they were made of plastic. "We had to use the old cell in the basement, the one with the thick concrete walls." I could hear the screaming from downstairs. Not words, just hungry animal sounds. "What about the people he attacked?" "Johnson's dead. Miller's in the hospital. Lost his arm, but he'll live. The third was Sarah from the diner. She was bringing coffee when he broke out of the first cell." "Is she..." "Dead. But Patricia, that's not the worst part. Before she died, she bit Officer Williams. Drew blood. And now Williams is saying he's hungry too." The contagion was spreading. Whatever chemical enhancement they'd used to create that thing, it was passing from person to person through bites. "Sheriff, we need to evacuate the town. Get everyone out of here." "With what authority? You want me to tell people there's a monster loose that used to be one of our neighbors? They'll think I've lost my mind." Before I could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow. From downstairs, the screaming got louder. Then we heard the sound of concrete cracking. "He's breaking out," Davies whispered. We drew our weapons and moved toward the basement stairs. The screaming had stopped, which somehow made it worse. All we could hear was our own breathing and the sound of something heavy moving around downstairs. "Hello?" a voice called from below. It sounded almost normal, almost human. "Is someone up there? I'm so hungry. Could you help me?" Davies started to answer, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head. The voice was wrong, too calm for someone who'd just killed 3 people. "Please," the voice continued. "I just need a little food, just a bite. You won't even miss it." We heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps that didn't sound quite right. Like someone walking who wasn't used to having legs. The thing that had been the hunter appeared at the top of the stairs. It still looked mostly human, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its clothes hung in tatters from a frame that was too tall and too thin. Its skin was gray-white, like old meat, but worst were its teeth. No longer human teeth, but rows of sharp points that filled its entire mouth. "I smell you," it said, and its voice was full of saliva. "You smell so good, so warm." Sheriff Davies raised his gun. "Don't move. Stay right there." The thing tilted its head like a curious dog. "You're going to shoot me? But I'm so hungry. Shooting me won't help with that." "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "To eat, to feed, to make the hunger stop." It took a step forward. "It's gotten so much worse since I changed. Everything looks like food now. Everything smells delicious." Davies fired twice. Both shots hit center mass, and the thing staggered backward. Black liquid seeped from the wounds, but it didn't fall down. Instead, it started laughing. "Thank you," it said. "I was wondering if you'd taste different with some adrenaline in your blood." It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. 1 second it was at the top of the stairs. The next, it had Davies pinned against the wall. I heard bones crack. I emptied my pistol into its back. 6 shots at point-blank range. It turned to look at me, Davies still in its grip. "Your turn," it said. But before it could move, windows started breaking all around us. Federal agents in hazmat suits poured into the building, carrying those strange weapons I'd seen in the woods. "Containment breach," someone shouted. Subject contamination confirmed. The creature dropped Davies and spun toward the agents, but instead of attacking, it grinned with all those sharp teeth. More food, it said happily. The agents opened fire. Not with bullets, with some kind of electrical weapons that made the air smell like ozone. The creature convulsed and fell to its knees, black liquid pouring from its mouth. But it was still smiling. Too late, it gasped. The hunger spreads. Can't stop it now. Agent Morrison appeared at my side. Ranger Ironwood, you need to come with us. Like hell I do. You've been exposed to the contamination. We need to run tests. I looked down at Sheriff Davies. He was unconscious, but breathing. Officer Williams was standing in the corner, staring at the downed creature with an expression I didn't like. He kept licking his lips. How many people has it infected? I asked. Morrison hesitated. We're not sure. The contamination vector is still being studied. Cut the crap. How many? Potentially everyone it bit. Everyone they bit. We're looking at maybe 24 people in the immediate area. 24 people turning into that thing, in a town of barely 800. What's your plan? Containment, quarantine, neutralization, if necessary. Neutralization. They were going to kill everyone who'd been infected. There has to be another way. Morrison looked at me like I was naive. Ranger, this organism was designed to be the perfect biological weapon. Spreads through blood contact, enhances physical capabilities, eliminates moral constraints around cannibalism. There is no cure. There is only containment. You created it. We tried to destroy it. Subject 7 was supposed to be incinerated, but during transport, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I'd read the reports. They'd lost control of their own creation. The creature on the floor stirred. Despite the electrical burns covering its body, it was trying to get up. Hungry, it whispered. Still so hungry. Morrison nodded to his team. They hit it with another electrical blast, stronger this time. Me. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. But it was still moving. Sir, one of the agents said, electrical suppression isn't working. Recommend we move to thermal disposal. Negative. We need it alive for study. With respect, sir, that's how we got into this mess in the first place. Morrison turned to me. Ranger Ironwood, you know these woods better than anyone. We need your help tracking the remaining infected individuals. I looked at Sheriff Davies, still unconscious on the floor. At Officer Williams, who was now biting his own hand hard enough to draw blood. At the thing that used to be a local hunter, still trying to get up despite being burned and electrocuted. What happens to the people you find? That depends on their level of contamination, which meant they'd kill the ones who were too far gone and experiment on the rest. I won't help you murder innocent people. Then you'll watch them become something worse than murder. The creature on the floor let out a long, hungry moan. In the distance, I could hear answering calls, more of them, scattered through the town. The hunger was spreading, and I was the only one who knew the truth about what the government had created, the only one who might be able to stop it before it consumed everything. But first, I had to get out of that building alive. Officer Williams was the first to change completely. I watched it happen while the federal agents argued about containment protocols. His eyes went from brown to yellow, his teeth grew longer and sharper, and he started looking at all of us like we were dinner. Sir, I said to Morrison, your contamination is accelerating. Williams had backed into a corner and was growling low in his throat. The sound wasn't human anymore. Tranquilize him, Morrison ordered. One of the agents raised his weapon, but Williams moved first. He lunged across the room faster than the original creature had moved, knocking the agent down and biting through his hazmat suit at the neck. Blood sprayed across the wall. The agent screamed once, then went silent. Thermal disposal now, Morrison shouted. The other agents opened fire with flamethrowers, real ones this time, not the electrical weapons. Williams caught fire and kept moving, burning as he tried to reach more people to bite. I grabbed Sheriff Davies under the arms and dragged him toward the back exit. He was starting to wake up, which was good. I needed him mobile. Patricia? He mumbled. What's happening? Government monsters, Sheriff. We need to get out of town. The building was filling with smoke from the burning creature. Through the haze, I could see Morrison's team falling back toward the front entrance, but there were shapes moving outside the windows. More infected people, drawn by the screaming. Sheriff, can you walk? Think so. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on me. Patricia, what the hell are those things? I'll explain later. Right now, we need to get to my truck. We made it to the back door just as something started pounding on the front entrance. Not knocking, pounding, like it was trying to break the door down with its fists. My truck was parked 50 yards away. Between us and it, I could see at least 3 figures shambling around the parking lot. In the red emergency lighting, they looked wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving like their joints didn't work right. Can you shoot? I asked Davies. My shoulder's messed up, but I can try. I handed him my backup pistol. Don't aim for the body, the bullets don't seem to stop them. Go for the head or don't bother. We made our run for it. The first creature saw us when we were halfway to the truck. It had been Sarah from the diner, but now it was something else entirely. Its waitress uniform was torn and bloody, and its face had stretched into something that was all mouth and teeth. Davies shot it twice in the head. It stumbled but kept coming. Aim better, I shouted. I'm trying. And the third shot took off the top of its skull. It finally dropped, black blood pooling around its head. We reached the truck just as 2 more creatures came around the building. I started the engine while Davies fumbled with his seatbelt, and we tore out of the parking lot with infected townspeople grabbing at the windows. Where are we going? Davies asked. To stop this, before it spreads beyond the valley. I drove us back toward the Boston Mills ruins, following the government vehicle's tire tracks in the snow. Davies read through the documents I'd taken from the dead soldier while I drove. Jesus Christ, Patricia. They made this thing on purpose. Biological weapon, designed to spread through enemy populations and turn them into cannibals. And now it's loose in our woods, and spreading to our people. We could see the government operation ahead. Floodlights, vehicles, and men in hazmat suits. They'd set up a command post in the ruins of an old house. What's the plan? Davies asked. Those documents mentioned a neutralization agent, something called W79. If they have it here, maybe we can use it to stop the spread. And if they don't want to help? I checked my pistol. Still had bullets left. Then we take it. We parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot. The federal operation was bigger than I'd thought. At least 50 people, military-grade equipment, and what looked like a mobile laboratory. Patricia, Davies whispered. Look. Through the trees we could see a containment area. Steel cages, each one holding something that had once been human. The creatures inside were all different stages of the transformation. Some still mostly human, others completely changed into those tall, hungry things. But what made my blood run cold was seeing Dr. Elizabeth Kane from the county medical center in one of the cages. She'd been trying to help with the medical response to the attacks. Now she was infected too. We have to help them, Davies said. We have to stop this first. If we can't find a way to reverse it, helping them won't matter. And we worked our way closer to the command post. Through the plastic walls of the mobile lab, I could see scientists in full protective gear working with chemical equipment. There, I pointed. They're making something. A sign on the equipment read, W79 Neutralization Agent, Prototype Production. That's it, Davies said. That's what can stop them. But getting to it meant getting past a lot of armed federal agents. And I was starting to hear the hungry moaning sounds coming from deeper in the woods. The infected were gathering. Sheriff, how many rounds you got left? Maybe 8. I've got 12. Not enough if they all come at once. That's when I noticed the flamethrower equipment. The agents had brought a lot of it. Industrial-grade fire suppression gear that had been modified for combat use. Change of plan, I said. We're going to burn them out. It took us 20 minutes to circle around to the fuel depot. The agents were focused on the containment area and the lab. They weren't expecting an attack from behind. I used my ranger knowledge of controlled burns to set up a fire that would spread fast through the dry undergrowth. But instead of containing it, I let it run wild toward the government camp. The first explosion came from a fuel tank near the vehicle depot. Then another. Within minutes, half the federal operation was on fire. In the chaos, Davies and I ran for the mobile lab. The scientists inside were trying to evacuate their equipment, but we got there first. "Nobody move!" I shouted, gun drawn. "We need the neutralization agent." One of the scientists, a woman in her 50s, turned to face us. "You don't understand. The W-79 isn't ready. We've only tested it on tissue samples." "Tested on them," I pointed toward the containment area, where the infected were going crazy from the fire and smoke. "It could kill them." "They're already dead," Davies said grimly. "Look at them." She was right to hesitate. The creatures in the cages barely looked human anymore, but one of them was still trying to talk, Dr. Kane, begging for help in a voice that was barely recognizable. "Please," Kane gasped through teeth that had grown too large for her mouth. "So hungry. Can't think straight. Help me." The scientist handed me a metal container about the size of a fire extinguisher. "This is all we have. Aerosolized W-79. It should neutralize the chemical enhancement, but what? The hunger might have already caused too much brain damage. They might not survive the reversal process." I looked at Davies. He nodded. "We have to try." I carried the neutralization agent toward the containment area while the federal camp burned around us. Some of the agents were trying to fight the fire. Others were trying to evacuate. A few were shooting at the infected creatures that had broken out of their cages in the confusion. But as I got closer, I realized we had a bigger problem. The fire I'd started was driving all the infected in the woods toward us. Dozens of them, shambling through the smoke like living nightmares. Too many to fight, too many to outrun. And somewhere among them was the original creature, Subject 7, bigger and hungrier than ever. The real fight was just beginning. The W-79 worked, but not the way we hoped. When I sprayed it on the infected people in the cages, the chemical change happened fast. Their gray skin turned pink again, their yellow eyes went back to brown, and their teeth shrank to normal size. But they were still hungry, still desperate, and most of them had suffered too much brain damage to ever be fully human again. Dr. Kane was the exception. When the neutralization agent hit her, she collapsed and didn't move for almost 10 minutes. When she finally opened her eyes, they were clear. "Patricia?" she whispered. "What happened to me?" "Long story, Doc. Can you walk?" She could, barely. But she could also help us understand what we were dealing with. "The compound doesn't just enhance hunger," she explained as we helped her out of the cage. "It rewrites brain chemistry, makes the infected see other people as food instead of people. The longer someone's infected, the more permanent the changes become." "What about the others?" Davies asked, looking at the other infected people we'd sprayed. They were human-shaped again, but they kept trying to bite each other. "Too far gone," Kane said sadly. The neutralization agent stopped the physical transformation, but couldn't repair the psychological damage. The fire was still spreading through the government camp. Most of the federal agents had evacuated, but we could see Morrison and a few others trying to save their research equipment. "We need to destroy all of it," I told Kane. "Every sample, every document, every piece of data about the Wendigo project." "Patricia, I understand your anger, but some of this research could help." "Help what? Help them make more monsters?" She looked around at the chaos, burning buildings, infected people wandering around in confusion, federal agents shooting anything that moved. "You're right. This has to end here." We spent the next hour making sure it did. Kane knew which equipment contained biological samples, and I knew how to use fire to destroy things completely. Davies kept watch while we worked, putting down any infected that came too close. The hardest part was dealing with the people who were partly cured. They looked human again, but they couldn't think straight, couldn't remember their families or their lives before the infection. All they knew was hunger. Morrison found us as we were finishing. He was burned and bloody, but still alive. Ranger Ironwood, you've interfered with a federal operation. I've stopped a federal disaster. He looked around at the destroyed camp, the scattered research, the infected people wandering aimlessly through. The smoke. Do you have any idea what you've done? Years of research, millions of dollars. Creating monsters, Davies interrupted. That's what your research was worth. We were developing defensive capabilities against... I shot him, not to kill, just in the leg, enough to put him down. I was tired of listening to government excuses for evil. The official story, I told him as he writhed on the ground, is that there was a chemical spill from old military exercises. A few people got sick, but we contained it. Anyone who says different is a conspiracy theorist. You can't cover this up. Too many people know. Look around, Morrison. Most of the infected are dead, or too brain damaged to tell anyone what really happened. The survivors will be listed as chemical exposure victims, and your agency will be very motivated to keep quiet about how badly you screwed up. Kane helped me load the last of the biological samples into the fire. What about the original creature? Subject 7? We never found it. Despite searching for 3 more days, there was no sign of the first Wendigo. It had vanished into the deep woods, maybe burned in the fire, maybe escaped to hunt somewhere else. The official report listed 16 casualties from chemical exposure during cleanup of old military contamination. The area around Boston Mills was declared a federal environmental hazard zone and closed to the public indefinitely. Most of the infected died within a week, their bodies too damaged by the transformation to survive. 3 of them lived, including Dr. Kane, but they were never quite the same. The hunger never completely went away. They just learned to control it. I stayed on as a ranger for 2 more years, then transferred to a different national forest. Too many bad memories in the Cuyahoga Valley. But I kept the documents I'd taken from that dead soldier, and I kept watching for signs of other government experiments. There were more. Different locations, different projects, but the same pattern. Military scientists playing with forces they didn't understand, and creating monsters they couldn't control. I've spent the last 20 years documenting them, building a network of people who know the truth about what our government creates in the name of national security. Sheriff Davies retired 6 months after the Helltown incident. He never talked about what we saw that night, but he started keeping a loaded shotgun by his bed and wouldn't eat meat that wasn't cooked well done. Some experiences change you in ways that never heal. Dr. Kane went back to her medical practice, but she specialized in treating what she called unusual exposure cases. People who'd encountered things the government didn't want acknowledged. She helped a lot of people over the years, and she never asked for payment from the ones who couldn't afford it. As for me, I learned to sleep with one ear open, because sometimes on quiet nights in the deep woods, I still hear that hungry moaning sound echoing through the trees. And I know that somewhere out there, Subject 7 is still hunting, still hungry, still growing stronger. The thing about government monsters is that they don't just disappear when you stop funding the project. They find ways to survive. They adapt. They spread. And they remember the people who tried to stop them. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. Hikers had reported seeing something impossible, a 12-foot creature eating a deer while it was still alive. The bite marks were 6 inches across. The footprints were 18 inches long. It's moving south, following the Appalachian chain, getting closer to bigger cities, more people. I'm heading to West Virginia tomorrow. Got my gear packed, my Geiger counter charged, and enough W79 neutralization agent to handle a small outbreak. Dr. Kane synthesized it for me using the notes we saved from the Helltown lab. The government will try to cover it up again. They'll send agents in suits who'll talk about chemical spills and national security. They'll quarantine the area and classify the evidence, but I'll be there first. And this time, I know what I'm hunting. Some people ask me why I keep doing this, why I don't just retire and let someone else deal with the monsters. The answer is simple. Because I've seen what happens when good people look the other way. I've seen what our own government is capable of creating when nobody's watching. And I've seen the hunger in those yellow eyes, a hunger that can never be satisfied, never be reasoned with, never be trusted to stay contained. Someone has to stand watch. Someone has to know the truth. Someone has to be ready when the monsters come home. If you're reading this, and you live anywhere near government land that was used for military testing, keep your eyes open. Watch for signs. Animals fleeing an area. Geiger counter readings that don't make sense, people acting strangely hungry. And if you see something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, don't try to handle it alone. Find me. Find Dr. Kane. Find Sheriff Davies if he's still alive. Because the hunger in Helltown was just the beginning. There are other projects, other experiments, other monsters waiting in the dark places where the government thought no one would ever look. The official story is always a lie. The truth is always hungrier than you think. And sometimes, late at night when the woods are quiet and the moon is dark, you can still hear them calling to each other across the valleys and ridges. A sound like wind through broken teeth, like bones cracking, like something that was human once but chose to become something else, something that's always hungry, something that's coming closer. My name is Patricia Ironwood, and I've been hunting government monsters for 20 years. This is my warning to you. They're still out there, and they're still hungry. My name is Harold Brightfeather, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 20 years. My Cherokee grandfather always told me stories about these mountains. Stories I thought were just old tales until October of 1956. That's when I learned some legends are warnings wrapped in pretty words. People come from all over to see the Brown Mountain lights. They bring their cameras and their city explanations, calling them swamp gas or ball lightning. I used to tell them the same thing. Made my job easier. Made me feel more like the modern man I thought I wanted to be, instead of the Cherokee boy who grew up hearing his grandfather's whispered warnings about the sky children. The Turner family arrived on a crisp October morning when the leaves blazed red and gold across the mountainsides. Jim Turner had that eager look tourists get when they think they're about to capture something magical on film. His wife Sarah kept checking on their two kids, Emma, maybe 8 years old with bright, curious eyes, and Jake, around 6, who kept asking if we'd really see the lights. Best viewing spot is near Cataract Falls, I told them, loading their camping gear onto my truck. Cherokee folks have been seeing lights in these mountains for hundreds of years. Jim's camera equipment filled half the truck bed. Professional stuff. I'm going to get definitive proof, he said. No more grainy photos or blurry footage. The world's going to know what's really up there. Sarah squeezed his arm. Just don't get so focused on your pictures that you forget to actually see them. I liked her already. The kids bounced in the truck bed as we drove up the winding mountain road, pointing at every shadow and flicker of sunlight through the trees. Normal kids being normal kids. I should have paid more attention to how the forest felt that day. Too quiet, like the mountains themselves were, holding their breath. We set up camp in a clearing about a mile from the falls. The spot offered a perfect view of the ridge where the lights usually appeared. I'd brought families here dozens of times before. It was safe, peaceful, and close enough to the main trail that getting back to civilization was never a problem. But as I helped Jim string up his equipment, something felt wrong. The squirrels that usually chattered in the oak trees were silent. No birds called from the undergrowth. Even the insects seemed muted, their usual evening chorus reduced to an uncomfortable whisper. "Daddy, why are all the animals hiding?" Emma asked, voicing what I'd been trying not to think about. "They're not hiding, sweetheart," Jim said, adjusting his camera's tripod. "They're just resting." I'd been in these mountains my whole life. Animals don't just rest all at once. They flee. But I didn't want to worry the family on their first night, so I kept my concerns to myself. As sunset approached, we gathered around the campfire I'd built. Sarah made hot chocolate while Jim fiddled with his camera settings. The kids roasted marshmallows and asked me to tell them Cherokee stories about the mountains. My grandfather used to say these mountains were alive, I began, falling into the rhythm of storytelling that had been passed down through generations. Every rock, every tree, every stream had its own spirit. Most were friendly, helpful even. But some what? Jake whispered, his eyes wide in the firelight. Some were lonely, so lonely they'd do anything to find companions. I stopped there. My grandfather's stories went much darker, filled with warnings about spirits that stole children, about lights that promised paradise but delivered something far different. But these were just stories, weren't they? Just old superstitions that had no place in the modern world. The first, light appeared just after full dark, a soft golden orb dancing between the trees on the far ridge, then another and another. "There!" Jim shouted, leaping to his camera. "Everyone stay! Still!" The lights moved like living things, swirling and pulsing in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. They were beautiful, I had to admit, more beautiful than any swamp gas had a right to be. But as I watched them dance, my grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "Beautiful things in the forest, Harold. That's how they get you. They make you want to follow." The lights grew brighter, and I swear I could hear something on the wind. Not quite music, not quite voices, but something that made both children lean forward, their young faces glowing with wonder and something else. Something that looked almost like hunger. The lights danced for nearly an hour, while Jim burned through roll after roll of film. Every shot came out wrong, pure white exposures, as if he'd pointed his camera directly at the sun. But we could see them clear as day with our naked eyes, swirling and pulsing in patterns that made my chest tight with old fear. "The camera's malfunctioning," Jim muttered, checking his equipment for the dozenth time. "These are $1,000 lenses. They should be capturing every detail." Sarah had noticed something else. "Harold, why aren't the children answering me?" I turned to look. Emma and Jake sat perfectly still by the dying campfire, their faces turned toward the lights. Their eyes reflected the golden glow like mirrors, and they hadn't blinked or moved in several minutes. "Kids?" I called softly. Nothing. "Emma? Jake?" Sarah shook her son's shoulder gently. He swayed but didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice her touch. Both children breathed in perfect unison, slow and deep, like they were sleeping with their eyes open. "What's wrong with them?" Jim demanded, abandoning his camera to kneel beside his daughter. The lights suddenly stopped dancing. They hung motionless in the air for a heartbeat, then began moving toward us. Not drifting, moving with clear purpose and direction. "We need to get them inside the tent," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. My grandfather's warnings echoed louder now. When the sky children come close, real children forget the earth. Jim scooped up Emma while Sarah tried to lift Jake. The boy was surprisingly heavy, his body rigid as a statue. The lights drew closer, and now I could hear that sound more clearly. It wasn't quite singing, wasn't quite whispers, but it pulled at something deep in my chest, made me want to walk toward those beautiful glowing orbs and never look back. "Hurry," I urged, helping Sarah carry Jake. The tent seemed impossibly far away, though it couldn't have been more than 20 yards. We made it inside just as the lights reached the edge of our campsite. Through the thin nylon walls, I could see them hovering just outside, their glow turning the tent into a golden cocoon. The sound grew stronger, and I felt my own mind growing heavy, my thoughts drifting toward dreams of floating among the stars. But my grandfather's blood ran strong. I bit down hard on my tongue, using the pain to anchor myself to the present. "Don't listen," I whispered to Jim and Sarah. "Cover your ears. Think of something else. Anything else." "What's happening to our children?" Sarah's voice cracked with panic. Emma and Jake lay on their sleeping bags, still as dolls, their eyes fixed on the tent roof as if they could see through it to the lights beyond. Their breathing had slowed even more, and in the golden glow filtering through the tent walls, I could swear their skin was starting to luminescence. "Old Cherokee stories," I said, my mouth dry as sand. "The sky children. They come when the boundary between worlds grows thin, looking for companions. They promise eternal happiness, endless play in a paradise beyond the stars." "That's impossible," Jim said, but his voice shook. "Is it?" I pointed to his children. Look at them. Really look. Emma's hair seemed to float slightly as if she were underwater. Jake's fingertips glowed with soft golden light that pulsed in, time with the orbs outside. Both children smiled now, expressions of perfect, empty bliss. How do we stop it? Sarah whispered. I wished I knew. My grandfather had told me the old protections, the sacred words and rituals that could bind unwelcome spirits. But I'd never practiced them, never believed I'd need them. I was a modern Cherokee man, not some superstitious medicine man from the old days. The lights began to pulse in unison, and the children started to sit up slowly, their movements unnaturally graceful. Their eyes still reflected that golden glow, but now I could see something else in them. A vast, alien intelligence that was definitely not human. Mama, Emma said, her voice dreamy and distant. The light children want us to come play. They have games we've never seen, music we've never heard. They want to show us the place where no one ever gets sad or hurt or lonely. We want to go with them, Jake added, his voice perfectly synchronized with his sister's as if they were sharing the same thoughts. We want to go now. Both children stood and walked toward the tent entrance with smooth, floating steps. Jim and Sarah grabbed for them, but their hands passed right through their children's bodies as if the kids were made of mist. They're already halfway gone, I realized with horror. The lights are pulling them between worlds. Outside, the orbs pulsed brighter, and I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children's laughter. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all calling to Emma and Jake in languages from across time. Cherokee voices mixed with others I couldn't identify, all of them young, all of them achingly lonely. The sound of children who'd been taken by the lights long, long ago, and who were now helping to lure others to join them in their eternal, beautiful prison. Emma and Jake walked out of the tent like sleepwalkers, their parents' hands passing right through them whenever they tried to grab hold. The children moved toward the lights with that same floating grace, their faces turned upward with expressions of pure joy. There has to be something we can do, Sarah sobbed, running after her children only to stumble right through Jake's translucent form. I closed my eyes and reached deep into memories I'd spent 20 years trying to forget. My grandfather's voice, speaking in Cherokee around winter fires, teaching me words I'd thought were just pretty sounds. Sacred words. Binding words. Nvi uli helisti, I called out, my voice cracking as I struggled to remember the pronunciation. Cherokee children, come back to Cherokee earth. The lights flickered, and for a moment the children slowed. Emma turned toward me, and I caught a glimpse of her real self beneath the golden glow, confused, frightened, very far from home. But then the lights pulsed brighter, and the children continued their drift toward the forest edge. My words weren't strong enough. I wasn't strong enough. I was just a park ranger who'd forgotten how to be Cherokee. We need help, I told Jim and Sarah. Joseph Barefoot lives about 3 miles down the mountain. He's a medicine man, knows the old ways better than I do. Go, Jim said firmly. We'll stay with the kids, try to keep them in sight. I ran through the forest like a man possessed, branches tearing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me with every step. The lights followed Emma and Jake at a walking pace, but I knew that was just to keep their parents from panicking completely. Once they reached the sacred grove near Cataract Falls, the lights could take the children anywhere, or anywhen. Joseph's cabin sat in a clearing that reeked of sage and cedar smoke. He was waiting on his porch when I arrived, as if he'd known I was coming. The Sky Children are hunting again, he said, simply. I felt it in the wind 3 days ago. Can you stop them? I gasped, fighting for breath. He was already gathering items from his cabin, sage bundles, a leather pouch filled with sacred corn pollen, a drum made from elk hide. Maybe, if we're not too late. If you remember who you really are. We ran back through the forest together, Joseph's 70-year-old legs somehow keeping pace with my younger ones. He spoke Cherokee prayers as we ran, words that made the very air around us shimmer with power. We found Jim and Sarah at the edge of the sacred grove, watching helplessly as their children drifted between towering oak trees that had stood for centuries. The light swirled around Emma and Jake now, dozens of orbs forming complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of those patterns, I saw them clearly for the first time. Children made of pure light, their forms shifting between human and something else entirely. Some looked Cherokee, others came from tribes I didn't recognize, and still others seemed to be from different times altogether. Their clothing, their faces marking them as children from decades or centuries past. All of them beautiful, all of them lost, all of them reaching out to Emma and Jake with expressions of desperate loneliness. "They're not evil," Joseph murmured, beginning to arrange his ritual items in a sacred circle. "Just lonely. They've been alone between worlds for so long they've forgotten what it means to be human. They think they're offering paradise, but all they can give is beautiful emptiness." One of the light children floated closer to us, and I recognized the clothing, a Cherokee dress from the 1800s during the time of removal. A little girl who might have been taken from the Trail of Tears itself, stolen away to what the lights promised was a better place. She spoke, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The new children will be happy with us. No sadness, no pain, no ending, just light and music and games that last forever." "But no growth," Joseph replied in Cherokee. "No learning, no choice, no real life." The light children paused, confusion rippling through their forms like water. The concept of choice seemed foreign to them now. Emma and Jake had reached the very center of the grove, where an ancient spring bubbled up from the earth. Cherokee legend said this was a thin place where the boundaries between worlds were weak. The lights began to spiral faster around the children, and I could see both kids becoming more translucent with each passing moment. "Now," Joseph said, beginning to beat his drum in a rhythm that matched the human heartbeat. "Sing with me, Harold. Remember the songs your grandfather taught you." I opened my mouth and words came out. Cherokee words I didn't consciously remember learning, melodies that seemed to rise from the very bones of the mountain. The sound rolled across the grove like thunder, and the lights faltered. The light children turned toward us, their expressions shifting from confusion to something that might have been hope. "You're offering them a choice," I realized, "something they haven't had for centuries." Joseph nodded without breaking his rhythm. "Every spirit deserves the chance to find peace, even ones who've forgotten what peace looks like." But the lights weren't ready to let go. They pulsed brighter, pulling Emma and Jake toward a shimmering tear in the air that opened like a doorway to somewhere else. Through that opening, I caught glimpses of impossible beauty. Crystal cities floating in starlight, gardens where flowers sang, playgrounds that defied every law of physics. It was everything a child could ever want, everything except the chance to grow up. The light children reached out to Emma and Jake, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we'd lost them both forever. The tear in reality widened, revealing more of the light children's realm beyond. I saw towers made of crystallized music, rivers that flowed upward into star-filled skies, and playground equipment that shifted and morphed according to whoever played on it. It was magnificent, impossible, and completely wrong. Emma and Jake stood at the very edge of that opening, their bodies now more light than flesh. The spirit children surrounded them, their faces eager with centuries of loneliness finally about to be relieved. But as I watched, I saw something the light children couldn't, or wouldn't, see. In their beautiful realm, nothing grew, nothing changed, nothing died, but nothing was truly born either. The crystal flowers never bloomed or wilted, the singing rivers never reached the sea, the playground equipment served the same games for eternity. It was paradise, but it was also a prison. "Emma! Jake!" Sarah screamed, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. The children were almost completely in the other realm now. Joseph's drumming intensified, and I felt power flowing through me. Not my power, but the power of every Cherokee ancestor who had walked these mountains. My grandfather's voice, his grandfather's voice, going back through generations of people who had learned to live with the spirits instead of being consumed by them. I stepped forward into the circle of lights and immediately felt their pull. They wanted me too, these lonely beings. They promised I could watch over Emma and Jake forever, protect them in a place where nothing bad could ever happen. "Harold, don't!" Jim shouted. But I was already moving. The light children parted as I approached their realm. Up close, I could see them more clearly. Dozens of children from different times and places, all frozen at the moment they'd been taken. They'd kept their childlike wonder but lost their capacity for growth, for change, for the beautiful, painful process of becoming fully human. One of them, the Cherokee girl I'd noticed before, floated toward me. "Join us, cousin," she said in our ancient language. "The earth holds too much sorrow. Here, there is only joy." "What's your name?" I asked her. She paused, confusion flickering across her luminous features. I don't remember. Names aren't needed here. We're all just children." "I'm Harold Brightfeather," I said firmly. "Son of Robert Brightfeather, grandson of Samuel Brightfeather, who walked the Trail of Tears and survived. Great-grandson of Night Wind, who fought to keep our people on this land." Speaking the names aloud seemed to anchor me, to remind both myself and the light children what we'd lost by forgetting who we were. "You remember," the girl whispered, wonder and pain mixing in her voice. "I remember," I confirmed. "And I remember that Cherokee children belong to the Cherokee people, to the mountain earth, to the cycle of seasons and growth and loss that makes us who we are." I reached out to Emma and Jake, surprised to find I could touch them now. They felt cold as winter starlight, but solid enough to hold. "Kids," I said softly, "look at me. Really look." Emma's golden eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw her struggling to remember who she was beneath the light's influence. "You promised Mama you'd learn to ride your bike without training wheels this summer," I reminded her. "Jake, you wanted to be big enough to reach the high monkey bars at school. Those things are waiting for you at home." "We could have better games here," Jake said, but his voice was uncertain now. "Better isn't always right," I replied. "Growing up isn't about having perfect games. It's about learning, making mistakes, getting hurt sometimes, and figuring out how to be brave anyway." The light children pressed closer, their desperation growing as they sensed Emma and Jake wavering. Some of them began to weep, tears of pure starlight that fell upward into the void. "Please," the Cherokee girl begged. "We've been alone so long. Don't you want to stay and play with us?" My heart broke for them, these lost children who'd been promised paradise and received only beautiful stagnation. But I knew what I had to do. "You don't have to be alone," I told them. "There's another choice. You can come home too." The light children recoiled as if I'd struck them. "Home is gone," one of them said. "Our families are gone. Our time is gone." "Home isn't a place or a time," I said, echoing words my grandfather had spoken to me when I was young and angry about all the Cherokee people had lost. "Home is wherever Cherokee hearts remember Cherokee ways. You can choose to rest now, to join the ancestors who wait for you in the Nightland. You can choose to let go of the loneliness and find peace." Joseph's drumming shifted to a different rhythm, the song we sang for those passing from this world to the next. The sacred grove filled with power, and I felt the presence of Cherokee ancestors, generations of spirits who had found their way to proper rest. The light children looked around in wonder as shapes began to appear in the air around us. Cherokee grandmothers reaching out with loving arms, fathers who had died too young, children who had passed in the natural course of things and found peace on the other side. "We can go home," the Cherokee girl whispered. "You can go home," I confirmed. One by one, the light children made their choice. Some faded into the ancestral presence, their light transforming from lonely gold to warm, peaceful silver. Others retreated back through the tear in reality, not ready to let go of their paradise yet, but no longer actively trying to steal new companions. Emma and Jake began to solidify, their human nature reasserting itself as the supernatural influence weakened. They blinked, confused, looking around the grove as if seeing it for the first time. "Daddy?" Emma said in her normal human voice. "Where are we?" But our victory came at a cost. The effort of crossing between worlds, of channeling ancestral power, had drained me severely. I felt myself becoming translucent, caught between realms like the children had been. "Harold!" Sarah called out, but her voice seemed to echo me from very far away. The remaining light children sensed my vulnerability. If they couldn't have Emma and Jake, perhaps they could have me instead. They surged forward, their loneliness and desperation overwhelming their newfound understanding. I had one choice left, one way to ensure the Turner children made it home safely. I would have to become the guardian between worlds, standing watch to make sure the lights never again tried to steal Cherokee children from Cherokee land. The choice should have terrified me, but as I felt myself becoming something between human and spirit, I realized this was what my grandfather had been preparing me for my entire life. All those stories, all those warnings, they weren't just legends. They were training. Joseph's drumming reached a crescendo, and suddenly I felt anchored again, pulled back from the edge of becoming a light child myself. The old medicine man had worked some binding I didn't understand, tying my spirit firmly to the mountain earth. "Not today," he said with a grin that was all too human. "You have more work to do in this world before you join the ancestors." The remaining light children retreated through their dimensional tear, which began to close with a sound like crystal bells breaking. As it sealed shut, I caught one last glimpse of their realm, still beautiful, still perfect, still empty of real growth or change. Emma and Jake ran to their parents, completely solid now, completely human. They remembered the lights as a wonderful dream, nothing more. Sarah and Jim held their children tight, tears streaming down their faces. "The children won't remember the details," Joseph explained as he packed up his ritual items. "It's better that way, but they'll always be protected now. The lights won't be able to touch them again." "What about other children?" I asked. "The lights are still out there." Joseph nodded gravely. "Eli. Which is why we have work to do. Real work, like our ancestors did. Someone needs to remember the old ways, the old protections. Someone needs to stand guard over the following weeks. I learned everything Joseph could teach me. The sacred words, the proper rituals, the signs that warned when the boundary between worlds grew thin. I practiced until the Cherokee language felt as natural as English on my tongue, until I could sense spiritual disturbances from miles away. The Turner family left the mountains with a story they'd tell for years, about beautiful lights that danced in the forest, and about a Cherokee ranger who knew the mountains better than anyone alive. They never mentioned the supernatural aspects, convincing themselves it had all been tricks of light and shadow, stress and imagination. But they sent me Christmas cards every year, with photos of Emma and Jake growing up normal and happy. Emma learned to ride her bike without training wheels that next summer. Jake grew tall enough to reach the monkey bars. They became real children instead of eternal ones, and that was worth everything. The Brown Mountain lights still appear, especially during the harvest season when the Cherokee hold their festivals. Tourists still come with their cameras and their scientific explanations. I still tell them about swamp gas and ball lightning because most people aren't ready for the truth. But now I also watch. Joseph and I, and a few others who remember the old ways. We keep vigil during the thin times, when lonely spirits might try to steal children who belong to the living world. Sometimes I see them, the light children who chose to remain in their paradise. They dance on the ridgetops, beautiful and sad, still hoping someone will join their eternal games. But they don't come close anymore. They know someone is watching, someone who remembers both the Cherokee ways and the Cherokee responsibilities. 3 months after the Turner incident, I got a call from Joseph. More lights had been seen near Looking Glass Rock, and a family camping there reported their daughter had started sleepwalking toward the forest, speaking in a language they didn't recognize. I grabbed my grandfather's medicine bundle, the one I'd finally learned to use properly, and headed into the mountains. The work continues. It always will, as long as children laugh and play and grow in these ancient hills. The lights offer beauty and perfection, but Cherokee children belong to the Cherokee earth with all its pain and joy and endless possibility for becoming something more than they were yesterday. My name is Harold Brightfeather, and I keep watch in the mountains where my people have lived for 1,000 years. The sky children call to me sometimes, promising rest and eternal peace. But I have promises to keep first, children to protect, and ancestors to honor. The lights dance, but Cherokee children stay home. And that's how it should be. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 7 years. I need to tell you what happened last August before I lose the courage to write it down. Before I convince myself it was all just heat exhaustion and bad dreams. People think being a ranger is all about wearing a funny hat and telling tourists not to feed the bears. But I have a degree in zoology from Virginia Tech, and my specialty is predator tracking. I can tell you what killed a deer just by looking at the bite marks. I can identify scat from 50 yards away. I've tracked black bears, bobcats, even a few coyotes that wandered down from up north. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not some superstitious fool. I believe in science. I believe in evidence. At least, I used to. August 1983 was brutal. The worst drought Virginia had seen in 40 years. The Blue Ridge Mountains looked like they were dying. Normally green hillsides turned brown and crispy. Streams that had run for centuries dried up to mud. The heat pressed down on everything like a heavy blanket you couldn't kick off. I was working the Devil's Backbone area, which is exactly as ominous as it sounds. It's a narrow ridge trail that runs along the spine of the mountain, steep drops on both sides. On a clear day, you can see for miles. Beautiful, but dangerous. We'd already had 2 tourists fall trying to get the perfect photo that summer. The first weird thing happened on August 12th. A local farmer named Garrett called the ranger station, voice shaking. Said something had killed 3 of his cows. When I drove out to his property at the edge of the park, I expected to find dog kills or maybe a bear that had gotten too comfortable around humans. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 full-grown cows arranged in a perfect triangle in his field. Not a drop of blood anywhere. The animals looked like deflated balloons, their skins sunken against their bones. But here's the thing that made my hands go cold. Each cow had strange marks carved into their hides. Symbols. Precise, deliberate cuts that definitely weren't from any animal I'd ever studied. Mountain Devil got him, Garrett said, not meeting my eyes. He was 70 if he was a day, tough as leather, and I'd never seen him scared before. My granddaddy used to tell stories. Said the devil lives in the high places, comes down when it gets angry. I gave him the ranger speech. Probably a mountain lion, though the symbols were concerning. Maybe some sicko cult kids from the university. I took photos, filed a report, told him I'd set up trail cameras. You don't believe me, he said. That's fine. But Rebecca, you be careful up on that mountain. The devil don't care if you believe or not. I drove back to the station thinking about rabies and illegal hunting, not devils. That night I couldn't sleep. The heat in my cabin was suffocating even with every window open. Around 2 a.m. I stepped outside for air. That's when I noticed something wrong. The crickets had stopped. You don't realize how loud crickets are until they go silent. The forest was completely, utterly quiet. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then I smelled it. Sulfur. Like rotten eggs mixed with burning rubber. It made my eyes water. The smell faded after a few minutes. The crickets started up again. I went back inside and told myself it was probably just someone's car having engine trouble on the road nearby. But I didn't believe it. Not really. The next morning, I checked my trail cameras near Garrett's farm. Every single one had malfunctioned. The memory cards showed nothing but static, white noise with occasional dark shapes that could have been anything. I'd just replaced the batter, eyes 3 days ago. I was filling out the incident report when dispatch called. 3 hikers were missing on the Devil's Backbone Trail, college kids from Richmond, last seen yesterday. Afternoon. Their car was still in the parking lot, tent still at their campsite, but no sign of them. Standard protocol. I grabbed my pack, radioed for backup, and headed up the trail. The hike up Devil's Backbone normally takes about 2 hours. I made it in 90 minutes, pushing hard despite the heat. The sky was white and hazy, the sun a pale disk behind the drought haze. Every plant I passed looked half dead, leaves curling and brown. The water situation was getting critical. Big Branch Stream, which usually runs strong enough to require careful crossing, was completely dry. Just cracked mud and dead fish rotting in the sun. I'd been a ranger for 7 years and had never seen it like this. Halfway up, I found the first strange thing. Claw marks on an oak tree about 8 feet up. Deep gouges in the bark, 4 parallel lines. I took photos and measured them. The spacing was all wrong, too wide for a bear, too deep for a bobcat. Then I noticed the pattern. The marks weren't random scratches. They formed symbols like the ones on Garrett's cows. My hands started shaking as I traced them with my finger. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Thornfield. I'm seeing some unusual markings on the trail, requesting wildlife specialist backup." Static. Then, "Copy that. We'll send Dr. Morrison when he's available. Might be a few hours." I continued up. The silence was oppressive. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Just my boots on the dry trail and my own ragged breathing. Near the summit, I found their camp. 2 tents, perfectly set up. Food still in the bear bag, hung properly. Sleeping bags neatly rolled. But no hikers. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Thornfield. Anyone here?" My voice echoed and died. Then I heard it. A low moan coming from off the trail. I found them 50 yards into the woods. All 3 of them, sitting in a perfect circle ards, on a flat stone. They were alive but wrong. Their eyes were open but unseeing, staring at nothing. Drool running from their mouths. They didn't respond when I called their names or shook their shoulders. All 3 had the same symbol carved into their forearms. Fresh cuts, still bleeding. The same symbols from the cows. The same symbols from the tree. I called for medical evacuation immediately. While I waited, I examined the stone they were sitting around. It was old, really old, with more symbols carved deep into its surface. The stone was stained dark brown. Blood, I realized with horror. Old blood, layers and layers of it, soaked into the rock over years, maybe centuries. The helicopter came. They airlifted the kids to University of Virginia Medical Center. I stayed behind to process the scene, though I had no idea what I was processing. This wasn't animal behavior. This wasn't even human behavior that I could understand. As the helicopter disappeared over the ridge, the temperature dropped. I'm not talking about a normal cooling. The thermometer on my pack went from 96 degrees to 71 in less than a minute. My breath came out in visible puffs. The shadow fell over me slowly, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. Except there were no clouds. I looked up. Something was circling overhead. Something big. Too big to be any bird I knew. The wings were wrong. Leathery, like a bat's, but enormous. 20 feet across, maybe more. The body was dark against the white sky, too far up to see clearly, but I could feel it looking at me. Then it dove. I threw myself behind a tree as the thing swooped past, close enough that the wind from its wings knocked me sideways. Close enough to see. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't anything natural. The smell of sulfur washed over me so strong I gagged. I heard a sound, not a bird call, not an animal scream. It was laughter, deep, rumbling low, clatter that seemed to come from inside my own head. Then it was gone. The temperature spiked back to normal. The silence remained. I stood there, shaking, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, altitude sickness. None of those explanations felt right, but I clung to them anyway. I radioed for someone to meet me at the station. I needed to talk to someone who knew about local folklore, someone who might have answers. As I hiked back down, I noticed something else. Every water source I passed was dry. Not just low, completely, impossibly dry. Ponds that should have had at least a few feet of water were cracked earth. Springs that had been flowing for generations had stopped. The mountain was dying of thirst. And somehow, I knew it wasn't natural. Dr. Sarah Moonbeam arrived at the ranger station that evening. Yes, that's really her name. Her parents were hippies who moved to Virginia in the 60s. Sarah taught folklore and anthropology at UVA, and she'd helped me before when tourists reported ghost sightings that turned out to be reflected moonlight on mica deposits. I showed her the photos, the symbols on the cows, the tree, the hikers, the stone altar. Her face went pale. Where exactly did you find this? Devil's Backbone Trail, about a mile from the summit. You recognize them? She pulled out a book from her bag, flipped through pages, and showed me a drawing from 1847. The same symbols. These are contract marks, she said quietly. There are stories from all over Appalachia about bargains with entities, mountain spirits, devils, whatever you want to call them. They make deals with humans, protection, wealth, power, whatever someone wants badly enough. But the payment is always steep. That's just folklore, I said, but my voice shook. Superstition. Rebecca, I've spent 15 years studying these stories. There are documented accounts going back to the 1700s. Families who made bargains and prospered while their neighbors starved. Communities that survived disasters that should have killed everyone, but there's always a price, usually blood. She showed me more passages, stories of droughts that lasted until someone made a sacrifice, tales of creatures with wings and burning eyes that came down from the mountains when angered. The last documented case in this area was 1889, Sarah said. A mining town called Devil's Rest, about 10 miles from here. The mine dried up, the crops failed, the wells went empty. Then one night the whole town disappeared. Every man, woman, and child. Gone. The only thing left was symbols carved into every building. What kind of symbols? She showed me a photograph from an old book. My blood turned to ice. They were identical to the ones I'd seen. What happened to them? I asked. No one knows. The town was never resettled. It's still out there, abandoned. They say the devil took his payment. Before I could respond, dispatch called. Rebecca, we need you at Skyland Resort. Emergency. We drove up together. Skyland was one of the park's main lodges, usually packed with tourists. When we arrived, I understood why they'd called. Every single water source was dry. Taps, toilets, showers, nothing. The resort's well, which was 200 feet deep and had never run dry in 70 years of operation, was bone dry. 50 guests were panicking, and the manager looked ready to cry. We're evacuating everyone, he said. This is impossible. The water was fine this morning. While he coordinated the evacuation, I checked the well. I dropped a stone and counted. It hit bottom fast, too fast. I shined my flashlight down. Something had carved symbols into the walls of the well shaft all the way down. Fresh marks, the stone still white where it had been cut. There was no way a human could have done this. The well was too narrow to climb down, and the marks went all the way to the bottom. Sarah, I called, you need to see this. She looked and went silent. It's escalating. The entity is making a statement. What does it want? The same thing these creatures always want. Blood and tribute. The drought is artificial. It's punishing the area. It won't stop until someone makes a bargain. That night I couldn't leave the station. Sarah stayed with me, going through her books and old accounts. Around midnight the power went out. My flashlight died immediately, even though I'd just changed the batteries. Sarah's too. We sat in complete darkness. Then the temperature dropped again so fast I could see my breath in the beam of moonlight through the window. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Rebecca Thornfield. It knew my name. The voice was wrong. Too deep, too layered, like 3 people speaking at once. It resonated in my chest, made my bones vibrate. You have walked my mountain. You have seen my marks. You understand. Who are you? I managed to whisper. I am older than your mountains. I was here before the trees. I will be here when the stone crumbles to dust. Your people called me the Mountain Devil, though I have many names. A shape began to form in the darkness of the room. Red eyes glowing like coals. The smell of sulfur made me gag. The mountain is mine. The water is mine. The blood is mine. For generations your people paid tribute. They understood the old ways. But you have forgotten. Now the mountain dies of thirst, and your people will die with it. What do you want? Sarah asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The laugh rumbled through the room again. What I have always wanted, what is owed. 7 years of tribute unpaid, 7 years of disrespect. The debt must be settled. How? I asked. Blood for water, souls for rain. That is the old bargain. Give me what is owed, and the drought ends. Refuse, and watch everything die. The shape grew larger, more solid. I could see it now, a massive form, humanoid but wrong. Muscular arms that ended in claws. A head like a goat but twisted, wrong, and wings folded against its back, leathery and torn. I offer you a choice, Rebecca Thornfield. Ranger, protector, you know this land. You love it. I will give you power to save it, knowledge, life eternal. All I ask is one small thing. Help me collect what is owed. And if I refuse? Then watch. Watch as every stream goes dry, every plant dies, every animal perishes. Watch as your people come to the mountains seeking water and find only dust and death. Watch as I take what is owed anyway, but with no mercy, no restraint. The red eyes moved closer. I could feel heat radiating from the creature, smell burning flesh and rotting meat beneath the sulfur. You have 3 days to decide. 3 days before I collect the full debt. 7 souls for 7 years. Choose them, or I will choose for you. The darkness exploded with light and heat. Sarah and I were thrown against the wall. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. The power flickered back on. The temperature returned to normal. But carved into my wooden desk, burned deep into the wood, were the same symbols. And beneath them, words in English. 3 days. Sarah was shaking. It's real. God help us. It's all real. I looked at the burn marks on my desk, smelled the lingering sulfur, felt the pain in my back from hitting the wall. We need to find a way to stop it, I said. There has to be a way. We didn't sleep. Sarah and I spent the night going through every account she had, every story, every scrap of information about supernatural bargains in Appalachian folklore. Here, she said around 4 a.m., showing me a passage from a book written in 1823. Contract law. These entities are bound by their own rules. They can't break the terms of a bargain once it's made. That's their weakness. They're compelled to honor agreements. So, if someone made a bargain 7 years ago and stopped paying, that's why it's angry? More than angry. Bound entities get stronger when debts are owed. They can collect with interest, but the original bargain might have had terms we can use. We drove up to the Old Town Records office at dawn. I used my Park Service credentials to access historical documents. It took hours of searching through dusty files, but we finally found it. A contract, dated August 15, 1876. The town of Devil's Rest had negotiated with the Mountain Devil for prosperity and protection. In exchange, they agreed to annual tribute, 1 animal sacrifice during the harvest moon performed at the old stone altar. The contract was to last in perpetuity, binding on all who dwell within the mountain's shadow. The town was destroyed in 1889, Sarah said. 13 years into the contract, they must have stopped paying. So we're all bound by this? I asked. A contract our ancestors signed? According to supernatural law, yes. The entity has a legitimate claim. I felt sick. We can't just let it kill 7 people. No, Sarah agreed. But maybe we can renegotiate. She pulled out another book. This one focused on contract magic. If the terms were violated by both parties, if the entity took more than it was owed in 1889, then the contract might be void. We could negotiate a new one, better terms. How do we prove it violated the terms? The entire town disappeared. That's way more than 1 animal per year. If it took all those souls, it broke its own agreement. That gives us leverage. We had 1 day left. The drought was getting worse. We'd had reports of people getting sick from the heat. 3 elderly residents had died. The reservoir that supplied water to 5 towns was nearly empty. That afternoon, I hiked back up to Devil's Backbone, to the stone altar. Sarah came with me, carrying her books and a bag full of iron nails. Cold iron, she said, one of the few things these entities respected. We waited until sunset. The mountain was eerily silent, dead. Not a single bird or insect. The trees looked skeletal against the darkening sky. As the last light faded, the temperature dropped. The sulfur smell returned, and the mountain devil manifested. It was worse in full furs. Orm, 12 feet tall, massively muscled, with digitigrade legs ending in cloven hooves. The goat head had too many horns, twisting in impossible directions. The eyes burned like coals in a forge. Its wings spread wide, 25 feet across, blocking out the stars. "You return," it said, voice shaking the ground. "Have you brought my tribute?" "I've brought a challenge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You claim 7 souls are owed, but you already broke the contract in 1889. You took more than was agreed. The original bargain is void." The creature's eyes flared brighter. "Careful, little ranger." "Show us the contract," Sarah demanded. "Supernatural law requires it. You claim a debt, you must prove it." For a moment, I thought it would just kill us. The air crackled with heat and rage. Then the creature smiled, showing teeth like daggers. "Very well." It gestured with one clawed hand. Words appeared in fire in the air, showing the original contract. Sarah read through it quickly, her finger tracing the lines. "Here," she said. "Clause 7, subsection 3. The entity known as Mountain Devil shall take no more than the agreed tribute on pain of contract voidance and binding. You took an entire town, hundreds of souls. You broke your own terms." The creature's smile faded. "They violated first. They stopped payment." "After 13 years of faithful tribute," I countered. "1 year of missed payment doesn't justify taking hundreds of lives. You violated proportionality. The contract is void." Silence. The creature stared at us with burning eyes. I could feel it considering, weighing options. These things were bound by rules, Sarah had said. Ancient rules they couldn't break. "Perhaps," it finally said, "perhaps the old contract is flawed. Shall we negotiate a new one?" "Yes," I said. "New terms, fair terms." "What do you offer?" I'd been thinking, about this all day. "Protection instead of tribute. You agree to protect this area, its water, its wildlife, its people. In exchange, we maintain the old altar, keep the trails clear, and I'll serve as liaison. I'll make sure people remember you, respect you. No more blood, no more death. And if people forget again, if they violate this new bargain, then you get 1 soul," Sarah said. "Mine. I'll bind myself as collateral, but only if humans truly break the terms, not over misunderstandings or accidents." The creature laughed. "Clever, but insufficient. I am powerful. I am eternal. What do I gain from protecting you?" "Recognition," I said. "Right now you're forgotten. No one believes in you. But if you protect this area, if you become its guardian rather than its tormentor, people will know your name. They'll tell stories about you. You'll have power that comes from respect, not fear." "For how long?" 100 years, I said. "Then we renegotiate." The creature was silent, considering. The heat around us intensified. Then slowly it smiled. "Very well. Rebecca Thornfield, you have bound yourself to this mountain. For 100 years, I shall be its guardian. I will return the water. I will protect the land. But you must keep your people aware. You must maintain the altar. You must remember." "I will." "And if you fail, Rebecca Thornfield, I will take not 7 souls, but 70 times 7. Do you accept these terms?" I looked at Sarah. She nodded. "I accept." The creature extended its clawed hand. "Then seal it with blood, as the old ways demand." I pulled out my pocket knife and cut my palm, squeezing blood onto the stone altar. The symbols carved there began to glow. The creature placed its massive hand over mine. The heat was incredible. but I didn't pull away. "It is done," the mountain devil said. "The bargain is sealed. For 100 years I am bound to protect, and you, Rebecca Thornfield, are bound to remember." Thunder rolled across the clear sky. Within seconds, clouds appeared from nowhere. Rain began to fall, hid, vi, and cold and real. The drought was over. The rain lasted 3 days. The streams filled. The reservoir recovered. The plants perked up, turning green again. The official explanation was, a sudden shift in weather patterns brought moisture from the Gulf. The meteorologists couldn't explain it, but they accepted it. The 3 hikers woke up at UVA Medical Center with no memory of what happened. The symbols on their arms faded within a week. The doctors called it mass hysteria brought on by dehydration. Garrett's cows were buried on his property. The official report said they died from a rare bacterial infection. Everything went back to normal. Except it didn't. I'm still a ranger at Shenandoah, still working the Devil's Backbone area. But now I maintain the old stone altar. I clean it, make sure no one disturbs it. Once a year, on the anniversary of our bargain, I hike up and leave flowers. Not blood. I negotiated better terms than that. Sarah visits often. We've documented everything, kept records in case something happens to me. In 93 years, someone else will need to renegotiate. They'll need to know the history. The hikers come and go, never knowing what lives in this mountain. The tourists take their photos, complain about the heat, and leave. The park stays protected, the water flows clean, and nothing bad happens here anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I smell sulfur. Sometimes I see a massive shadow circling overhead, wings blotting out the stars. And sometimes I hear that voice, deep and layered, whispering my name. The mountain devil keeps its bargains. It protects this land now, as promised. But it watches, it waits, and it remembers. 93 years from now, someone will have to face it again. Someone will have to be clever enough, brave enough to negotiate new terms. I've started a file, kept in the ranger station, safe. Instructions. History. Everything the next person will need. Because the thing about making deals with supernatural entities, they always want to collect eventually, and when that happens, you'd better have a good lawyer, or at least know how to read the fine print. I still patrol the Devil's Backbone Trail, still help lost hikers, track wildlife, enforce park regulations. But now I know what else is out there, what lives in the high places, what watches from the shadows. The mountain has a guardian now, just not the kind anyone expected, and that's fine with me. As long as the water keeps flowing and people stay safe. That's all that matters, right? But on quiet nights, when I'm alone in my cabin and the crickets suddenly go silent, I wonder, did I make the right choice? Did I save people or just postpone something worse? In 93 years, someone else will find out. I just hope they're ready. My name is Samuel Colebrook, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years now. Before that, I spent 12 years down in the coal mines, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. The mountains of West Virginia have been my whole life, and I know every trail, every cave, and every old mine shaft in the Monongahela National Forest like they're rooms in my own house. Most folks think being a ranger is peaceful work. Watching trees grow, helping lost hikers, keeping campers from burning down the forest. And most days, that's true enough. But sometimes, the mountains show you things that make you wish you'd stayed down in the dark mines where the only monsters were cave-ins and bad air. It was September 1961 when the singing started. I remember the date because it was almost 20 years to the day since the big mine disaster at Colebrook Station. 47 men went down that day and never came back up. My daddy was one of them. The first report came from a family camping near Seneca Rocks. The Hendersons, nice folks from Charleston with 2 young kids. They'd set up their tent in one of the approved camping areas, same spot dozens of families used every summer without any trouble. "Ranger," Mr. Henderson said when he found me at the station that morning, his face pale and his hands shaking like leaves. Something's wrong out there. We heard singing last night. Church singing, like a whole choir, but it was coming from underground. His wife stood behind him, holding their little girl tight. The boy, maybe 8 years old, wouldn't even look at me. Just stared at his shoes like he'd seen something that scared him deep down. "What kind of singing?" I asked, getting out my notepad. Usually these reports turned out to be wind through the rocks, or maybe some teenagers fooling around. "Hymns," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "Old mining songs, Deep River, and Going Home." Well, the voices. They sounded so sad, Samuel, like they were crying while they sang. That got my attention. Not many people knew the old mining songs anymore. And the way she said my name, like she knew me, though I'd never met these folks before in my life. "Where exactly did you hear this singing?" Mr. Henderson pointed toward the old mining area, where the company had sealed up the shafts back in '42 after the disaster. Right near those concrete barriers. Started just after midnight and went on for near an hour. I drove out there with them to take a look. The concrete seals were still solid, no cracks or holes where sound could leak through. The Henderson kids wouldn't get out of the car, and I couldn't blame them. Even in daylight, something felt wrong about that place. The air was too still, and the trees seemed to lean away from the sealed mine entrances like they were trying to get as far away as possible. Probably just an echo from somewhere else, I told them. But I was lying. I'd grown up around these mines, and I knew their sounds. This was something different. That night I got 3 more calls. The Martins heard it from their cabin. The Johnsons called from the motel in town, said they could hear it even with their windows closed. And old Pete Wilson, who'd worked the mines with my daddy, called me at home. "Sam," he said, his voice rough from 40 years of coal dust, "you need to get down to the old workings. The boys are singing again." "What boys, Pete?" "You know what boys. The ones who never made it out." I hung up and tried to convince myself Pete was just getting old, maybe drinking too much. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was starting, something that had been waiting 20 years to begin. The next morning I found fresh flowers on the concrete seal at mine shaft number 3. Wildflowers that didn't grow anywhere near that spose, had arranged in a perfect circle like someone had made a grave marker. When I bent down to pick them up, I could swear I heard something, just for a second. A voice I recognized, singing soft and low. It sounded like my daddy. I told myself I was hearing things. 20 years of grief can play tricks on a man's mind, especially when he's standing where his father died. But when I got back to the ranger station, there was already another family waiting for me, and they looked worse than the Hendersons. The Kowalskis had been camping with their teenage son, Tommy. The boy was in the hospital now. "He just walked off in the middle of the night," Mrs. Kowalski sobbed. "We found him at sunrise, standing right up against one of those concrete walls, clawing at it with his fingernails until they bled. He kept saying he had to get to his friends, that they were calling for him." "What friends?" I asked, though I was starting to get a cold feeling in my stomach. "He said their names," Mr. Kowalski whispered. "Old-fashioned names. Irish and Welsh names, like the miners used to have. But Tommy doesn't know any miners. He's never even been in a mine." I drove to the hospital to see the boy. Tommy was awake but staring at the ceiling like he was listening to something only he could hear. When he saw me, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Are you Sam Colebrook?" he asked. "The miners told me about you. They said your daddy's with them now." My blood went cold. "What did they tell you, son?" "They're trapped," Tommy whispered. "Been trapped for 20 years. They want to come home, but they can't leave until someone helps them." He squeezed my arm tighter. "They're so tired of singing alone." The doctor said Tommy had inhaled some kind of gas, probably methane leaking from old mine workings. But methane doesn't make people know things they've never learned. It doesn't make them call out the names of men who died before they were born. I called the state mine inspector that afternoon. William Ashford was a good man, thorough and honest, and he'd worked with me before, or on safety inspections around the old sites. "Sam, those seals are solid," he said when I explained what was happening. I checked them myself just last year. No gas leaks, no structural problems. Whatever's affecting these people, it's not coming from the mines. But he agreed to come out and run tests anyway. We met at the sealed entrances just before sunset, carrying gas detectors and air quality monitors. The machines started acting strange as soon as we got within 50 feet of the concrete barriers. "That's impossible," Ashford muttered, tapping his gas detector. "This thing says there's methane, carbon monoxide, and about 6 other gases that shouldn't exist in the same place. And look at the concentration readings. They're off the charts." That's when we heard it. Both of us, clear as day. Voices rising from somewhere deep underground, harmonizing in perfect pitch. 47 voices singing Amazing Grace, like they were standing in a church instead of buried in a collapsed mine. Ashford's face went white. "Sam, those seals are solid. Sound can't travel through 20 feet of concrete and steel." But it was. The singing got louder, and I started picking out individual voices. There was old Murphy, who used to tell jokes during lunch breaks. Jimmy Patterson, who was only 17 when the mine came down. And underneath them all, strong and clear, was a voice I'd been hearing in my dreams for 20 years. "Daddy?" I whispered. The singing stopped. All at once, like someone had cut a wire. The gas detectors went quiet too, showing normal readings again. But in the sudden silence, I heard something that made my knees go weak. My father's voice, speaking my name. "Samuel." Ashford grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now." But I couldn't move. Because floating in the air in front of the concrete seal was a miner's lamp, glowing with the soft yellow light I remembered, bred from childhood. It bobbed gently like someone was carrying it, and I could see the shadow of a man behind it, tall and thin, wearing the kind of overalls my daddy used to wear to work. "The gas," Ashford said, pulling me backward. "It's hallucinogenic. That's why the families are seeing things." Maybe he was right. Maybe the gas was making me see what I wanted to see. But as we stumbled away from the mine, I heard my father's voice one more time, calling after me. "Don't leave us here, son. Please don't leave us here." That night, 3 more people ended up in the hospital. All of them had been drawn to the old mine workings. All of them talked about hearing voices calling their names. And all of them knew things about the 1942 disaster that weren't in any history books. Details only the miners themselves would have known. I sat in my truck until dawn, watching the sealed entrances and listening. The singing came again just before sunrise, softer this time, but no less real. And I finally understood what my daddy and his friends were trying to tell me. They weren't just trapped in the mine. They were trapped between worlds, unable to rest until someone helped them finish what the cave-in had started 20 years ago. They wanted to come home. Word spread fast in a small mountain community. By the 3rd day, people were driving from 3 counties away to hear the singing ghosts of Colebrook Station. Some came as tourists, others as believers, and a few came with cameras and recording equipment, hoping to catch proof of life after death. None of them were prepared for what they found. The first death happened on Thursday night. A young reporter from the Charleston paper had set up his equipment near mineshaft number 2, determined to record the voices for his story. They found him Friday morning, sitting cross-legged against the concrete seal with his eyes wide open and a smile on his face. He was stone dead, but his tape recorder was still running. "Heart attack," the coroner said, "probably from the excitement and the bad air." But when they play, Ed back is recording, it was 47 minutes of the most beautiful singing anyone had ever heard. And at the very end, you could hear the reporter's voice, soft and wondering. "I understand now," he whispered on the tape. "I can see them. They're so tired. They just want to rest." That should have been enough to keep people away, but it wasn't. If anything, more came. They brought flowers and left them at the sealed entrances. They sang along with the underground choir when it started up each night, and some of them never left. I tried to get the area closed off, but the county commissioners wouldn't hear of it. Too much money coming in from the visitors, they said. Too much attention for our little town. Besides, they reasoned, people were just getting overexcited. A little bad air never killed anyone who used common sense. Then Mrs. Davies showed up. She was about 70 years old, thin and bent, but with eyes sharp as broken glass. She'd driven down from Pennsylvania, she said, to see where her husband had died. William Davies, she told me. He was a shift supervisor in 1942. They never found his body. I remembered the name from the disaster records. Davies had been trying to lead men to safety when the main support beam failed. The rescue teams had given up looking for him after 2 weeks. "Ma'am, I don't think you should be here," I said. "It's not safe, especially at night." She just looked at me with those sharp eyes. "Boy, I've been waiting 20 years to say goodbye to my husband. I ain't leaving now." That night, she set up a folding chair right in front of mine shaft number 3 and waited. I tried to talk her into going to the motel, but she wouldn't budge. So I stayed with her, sitting in my truck with the windows down, listening. The singing started at midnight, same as always. Mrs. Davies stood up from her chair and walked right up to the concrete, the seal, pressing her hands against it like she was trying to push through. "William?" she called. "William, is that you?" The singing stopped. For a moment there was only silence and the sound of Mrs. Davies crying. Then, clear as if he was standing right next to her, came a man's voice. "Rose? Rose, my darling, is that really you?" She pressed her face against the concrete, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've missed you so much, William. I've missed you every day for 20 years. I know, love, I know. But you can't stay here. This place, it's not for the living." "Then come with me," she whispered. "Come home." "I can't, Rose. None of us can. We're bound here until someone helps us finish what we started." That's when I understood. The mine disaster hadn't just killed 47 men. It had left 47 jobs undone, 47 lives cut short before they could reach their natural end. And now they were trapped, unable to move on until someone completed what they'd begun. "What do you need?" Mrs. Davies asked, and I could hear the pain in her voice. "Our bodies," came the reply. "They sealed us in, Rose. We never got a proper burial. We never got to say goodbye." Mrs. Davies turned to look at me, her face wet with tears. "You hear that, Ranger? They need their bodies found. They need to be laid to rest proper." But I was already thinking about the logistics. The mine had collapsed completely. The rescue teams had declared it too dangerous to continue searching. The company had pumped it full of concrete and sealed it forever. Getting to those bodies would mean breaking through the seals and tunneling into an unstable mine that had been closed for 20 years. It would be expensive, dangerous, and probably impossible. "I'll try," I promised Mrs. Davies, but I didn't know how. The next morning I called every mining company in 3 states. Most of them hung up when I explained what I needed. The few who listened told me the same thing. It couldn't be done safely, and it would cost more money than the county had. But the spirits aren't willing to wait. On Saturday night, the concrete seal on mine shaft number 3 started to crack. Not from age or weather, but from something pushing against it from the inside. By Sunday morning, there was a hole just big enough for a man to crawl through. The singing was getting louder too. You could hear it during the day now, not just at night. And the voices were getting clearer, more insistent. They called out names of living people, drew them to the mine entrances, tried to convince them to crawl through the growing holes in the seals. "They're getting stronger," Ashford said when he came to check the damage. "Whatever's keeping them here, it's feeding on all the attention they're getting." 3 more people disappeared that week. A college student from Morgantown, an elderly man from Ohio, and a woman who claimed she could talk to spirits. The searchers found them all in different spots around the old mining area, sitting peacefully with their backs against trees, dead from exposure. But they were all smiling, and according to the coroner, they'd all died singing. I knew I was running out of time. The spirits were getting desperate, and desperate ghosts were dangerous ghosts. If I didn't find a way to help them soon, more people were going to die. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I was going into the mine myself. I went in just after midnight on Sunday, when the singing was loudest and the hole in mine shaft 3 was big enough for me to squeeze through. I brought my father's old mining helmet, the one they'd given back to my mother after the disaster, and a battery-powered lamp that I hoped would last long enough to find what I was looking for. The tunnel beyond the seal was exactly as I remembered it from my mining days, except for the bodies. They were everywhere, perfectly preserved by the cold, dry air and whatever supernatural force was keeping their spirits bound to this place. 47 men sitting against the tunnel walls as if they'd just stopped to rest, their mining equipment still clutched in their hands. And they were all looking at me, not moving, not breathing, but their eyes were open and aware and full of such sadness that I had to stop and catch my breath. These weren't zombies or monsters. They were just tired men who wanted to go home. "Daddy?" I whispered, and my voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "Over here, son." I followed the voice deeper into the mine, past the bodies of men I'd known and worked with, until I found him sitting in the supervisor's alcove where he died trying to coordinate the evacuation. He looked exactly as I remembered him, tall and lean with calloused hands and eyes the same color as mine. "You came," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here, Daddy. I'm here. Tell me what you need." He stood up slowly, his joints creaking like old wood. "We need to be found, Samuel. Officially found. The company covered up how bad the collapse was. They sealed us in and told the families there was nothing left to recover. But we're here. We've always been here." "I know, but how?" "You're a ranger," he interrupted. "You have authority. You can call it in as a new discovery. Say you found evidence of survivors who made it past the original collapse area. Once the families know where we are, once we get proper burials, we can rest." It sounded simple enough, but I could feel the weight of the mountain above us, the instability in the air. "Daddy, this place feels ready to come down. How do I get back out?" His expression grew troubled. "That's the problem, son. The mine's been weakening for 20 years. All the spirits moving around, all the singing, all the people coming to listen. It's shaken things loose. One more collapse might bring down the whole mountainside." As if to prove his point, dust rained down from the ceiling, and I heard the ominous creak of settling rock. "Yo, we'll have to hurry," my father said. "Get back to the surface and call for help. Tell them you found us, but be careful, Samuel. The mine knows you're here now, and it wants to keep you." I turned to leave, but the tunnel had changed. Where there had been one passage leading back to the entrance, now there were three, all identical, all dark. The spirits were trying to help me, but the mine itself was fighting against them. "This way, son," my father called, pointing to the left tunnel. But another voice, Murphy I think, was shouting for me to go right. And from the third tunnel came the sound of rushing water, which was impossible because there was no water source up here. The ceiling creaked again, louder this time, and I felt rocks hitting my helmet. I had to choose quickly, or I'd end up trapped down here with the rest of them. I followed my father's voice. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, growing narrower and more unstable with each step. Behind me, I could hear the mountain groaning, settling, preparing to collapse. The singing had started again, all 47 voices raised in a hymn I recognized from childhood. "Swing low, sweet chariot." But now it sounded like a funeral dirge. "Faster, Samuel," my father urged. "It's starting to go." The main support beam above my head was bending, small stones raining down constantly now. I could see light ahead, blessed daylight from the hole in the seal, but it seemed impossibly far away. That's when the tunnel behind me collapsed completely. The sound was deafening, like the world ending all at once. The force of it knocked me forward, sending me scrambling on hands and knees toward the light. I could feel the mountains settling above me, could hear the groaning of wood and stone as 20 years of supernatural activity finally brought down what the original disaster had started. I reached the hole just as the section bees behind me caved in completely. Willing hands, living hands, grabbed me and pulled me through into the cool night air. Ashford and 2 county deputies had come looking for me when they'd seen my truck parked at the mine entrance. "Sam, what the hell were you thinking?" Ashford shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the mountain collapsing. Mine shaft 3 was falling in on itself. and the vibrations were spreading to the other sealed entrances. As we watched, all 6 of the old mine entrances cracked open like eggs, revealing the tunnels and chambers that had been hidden for 20 years, and floating up from each opening, glowing in the darkness, came 47 miners' lamps, the spirits finally free to leave their underground prison. The singing stopped. After a week of constant, mournful hymns, the sudden silence was almost overwhelming. But in that silence, I heard my father's voice one last time. "Thank you, son. Thank you for bringing us home." The lamps faded one by one until only darkness remained. But it was a peaceful darkness now, not the oppressive weight that had hung over this place for 20 years. The spirits of Colebrook Station were finally at rest. The official report said I'd discovered evidence of mine survivors who had made it past the original collapse area before succumbing to bad air. It wasn't exactly a lie. I had found them, after all. The county brought in a full recovery team, and within 2 weeks, they'd retrieved all 47 bodies. Mrs. Davies got to bury her husband properly. So did 46 other families who had waited 20 years for closure. The funerals went on for 3 days, and people came from all over West Virginia to pay their respects to the miners who had finally come home. I kept the supernatural part of the story to myself, mostly. Who would believe it? But Mrs. Davies knew, and old Pete Wilson knew, and a few others who had grown up around the mines. They understood that some things can't be explained by gas leaks and overactive imaginations. The mine site became a memorial park. The KOU, and I installed benches and planted flowers, and people still come to visit. But for different reasons now. They come to remember the dead, not to gawk at ghosts. The singing has stopped forever, but sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is just right, you can hear something that sounds almost like voices humming old Welsh mining songs. I stayed on as a ranger for another 15 years. The work felt different after that night in the mine. I paid more attention to the old places, the forgotten corners of the forest where tragedies had left their mark. I learned to recognize the signs when the dead were trying to tell the living something important. And I wasn't the only one. Ashford started getting reports from other old mining areas, places where disasters had been covered up or forgotten. Sometimes we'd investigate together, and sometimes we'd find that the dead had stories to tell. We helped when we could, always quietly, always carefully. The mountains of West Virginia are full of old wounds, old injustices, old sorrows that never found their proper rest. Most people drive through and see nothing but pretty scenery. But if you know how to listen, if you know what to look for, you can hear them singing their mourning songs in the wind. My name is Samuel Colebrook, and I've learned that the dead don't always stay buried. Sometimes they sing until someone remembers their names, until someone cares enough to bring them home. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be the one who helps them find their rest. The mining company that sealed up Colebrook Station went out of business in 1963. But I heard their other operations, the ones in Kentucky and Pennsylvania, have been having problems lately. Workers reporting strange sounds underground, equipment moving on its own, voices calling from abandoned tunnels. I'm retired now, but I still get calls sometimes. From angers and mine inspectors and safety officials who don't quite know what to do with the things they're seeing and hearing. I always tell them the same thing. Listen to what the dead are trying to say. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're just trying to come home. And if you're patient and brave enough to help them, they'll find their peace eventually. We all will. My name is Michael Grimwood, and I've been a park ranger in the Allegheny National Forest for 13 years. Before that, I spent 3 years in seminary school studying to be a priest. I never finished those studies, but I learned enough Latin and church history to know that most stories about witches and demons are just made-up nonsense from scared people who didn't understand the world around them. That was before Halloween 1979, when everything I thought I knew got turned upside down. The first sign of trouble came on a cold Tuesday morning in October. 2 college kids from Pittsburgh were hiking the old logging trail near Witches Hollow when they found something that made them run all the way back to the ranger station. They burst through my door, both of them pale and shaking. "There's dead animals out there," the girl said, her voice barely a whisper. Lots of them, all arranged in a pattern. I grabbed my jacket and followed them back into the woods. The name Witch's Hollow came from old stories about colonial-era witches hiding in these mountains, but it was just folklore. Nothing more than campfire tales to scare tourists. What I found that morning changed my mind. In a small clearing about 2 miles from the main trail, someone had arranged the bodies of rabbits, squirrels, and birds in a perfect 5-pointed star. Each animal had been killed cleanly, with no signs of struggle or predator marks. At the center of the star sat a pile of smooth river stones, and carved into the biggest stone was a symbol I recognized from my seminary days, an inverted cross with strange letters around it. Probably just some kids playing around with occult stuff, I told the hikers, trying to sound calm. But my hands were shaking as I took pictures. The animals were still warm, which meant this had happened recently, maybe even while we were walking to the clearing. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the site and filling out paperwork. Standard protocol for cult activity was to notify the state police and keep an eye out for suspicious behavior. The 1970s had brought a lot of interest in witchcraft and occult practices, especially among young people. Most of it was harmless, kids reading books about magic and burning candles. But sometimes groups got carried away and started killing animals. Or worse. That night I called Father McKenna at St. Mary's Church in town. He'd been a priest for 40 years and had dealt with occult problems before. Michael, he said after I described what I'd found, you need to be very careful. Those symbols you described, they're not from some book about modern witchcraft. They're old, much older than you might think. How old? I asked. Colonial period, maybe earlier. And if someone is using them correctly, you might be dealing with more than just confused teenagers. I laughed, but it came out nervous and shaky. Come on, Father. You don't really believe in that stuff, do you? There was a long pause. I've seen things, Michael. Things that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. Just promise me you'll be careful. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what had happened. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the old cabin creak and groan. Every sound made me jump. By the time I went to bed, I'd convinced myself that it was just kids playing pranks before Halloween. I was wrong. The next morning, I got a call from Sarah Henderson's mother. Sarah was 17, a good kid who loved hiking and photography. She'd gone out the day before with her boyfriend Tim to take pictures of fall leaves and hadn't come home. She always calls if she's going to be late, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice tight with worry. Something's wrong, Michael. I can feel it. I drove out to the parking area where Sarah usually started her hikes. Her car was still there, covered in morning frost. Tim's motorcycle was parked next to it. I found their trail easily enough. Sarah's bright red backpack and Tim's heavy boots left clear marks in the soft ground. The trail led straight toward Witch's Hollow. About a mile in, I found Sarah's camera hanging from a tree branch. The film had been pulled out and scattered on the ground like confetti. Whatever pictures she'd taken, someone didn't want them seen. I followed their tracks deeper into the woods, calling their names. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the trees were holding their breath. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was Sarah and Tim talking, but as I got closer, I realized the voices were speaking a language I didn't understand. Not English, not Spanish. Something much older. I crept through the trees until I could see into another clearing. Sarah and Tim were sitting in the middle of a circle carved into the dirt. They were facing each other, talking in that strange language, their voices flat and emotionless. Their eyes were open but seemed to be looking at something far away. "Sarah!" I called out. "Tim!" They didn't even turn their heads. I stepped into the clearing and immediately felt the temperature drop 20 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it had been a warm morning. The circle around the kids was made of symbols carved deep into the earth, the same symbols I'd seen on the stone the day before. "Sarah, it's Michael. Your mom is worried about you." This time Sarah turned to look at me, but her eyes were completely black. No white, no color. Just black from edge to edge. "She cannot hear you," Sarah said, but her voice sounded like an old woman's. "She belongs to us now." I reached for my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static mixed with voices whispering in Latin. The Latin I'd learned in seminary wasn't perfect, but I could make out a few words. "Come to us. Join us. Forever and always." Tim stood up slowly, like his body wasn't quite working right. When he spoke, it was in the same old woman's voice. "You have the knowledge, Grimwood. You can see what others cannot. You would make a good servant." I backed away from the circle, my heart pounding. This wasn't drugs or pranks. This was something else entirely. Something I didn't have a name for. "Who are you?" I asked. Sarah tilted her head, and I heard her neck crack like dry wood. "We are the ones who came before. The ones who were burned but did not die. The ones who wait in the hollow places for new servants to find us." The temperature kept dropping. Ice was forming on the trees around the clearing. Sarah and Tim stood up and started walking toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural. I ran. I crashed through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I could hear laughter echoing through the trees behind me. Back at the station, I tried to call the state police, but my radio was still picking up those whispered voices. I grabbed the phone and dialed, but the line was full of static. Every few seconds, I'd hear Sarah's voice saying, "You cannot run from us, Michael. We know where you live." I slammed the phone down and sat in my chair, trying to think. In seminary, we'd studied cases of possession and exorcism. The professors always treated them as historical curiosities, things that happened to superstitious people in the old days. But they'd also taught us the warning signs and the proper procedures, just in case. Sarah and Tim showed every sign of possession I'd ever read about. But possessed by what? And why? As the sun set, I knew I had to go back. Those kids were in danger, and I was the only one who knew where they were. But I wasn't going back unprepared. I drove to St. Mary's Church and found Father McKenna in his office. "I need holy water," I told him, "and a crucifix, and maybe some advice about demons." He looked at my face and didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and started gathering supplies. Father McKenna insisted on coming with me. "You don't face something like this alone," he said as he blessed a bottle of water and tucked a worn leather book into his coat pocket. We drove back to Witch's Hollow just after sunset. The forest looked different in the darkness. Older, somehow, like we were driving back through time. My headlights picked up things moving between the trees, but when I looked directly at them, nothing was there. "Michael," Father McKenna said quietly, "how much do you know about the Salem witch trials?" "Just the basics. Bunch of innocent people got accused and executed because of mass hysteria. That's what most people think. But 19 people were executed, and their bodies were never properly buried. Church records from the time mention that several of the accused escaped before they could be tried. So what if some of them really were witches? And what if they came here to these mountains to hide?" I stopped the truck at the trailhead. "You're saying we're dealing with 300-year-old witches?" "I'm saying we should be prepared for anything." We hiked into the woods with flashlights and backpacks full of church supplies. The forest was completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Even our footsteps seemed muffled. When we reached the clearing where I'd found Sarah and Tim, it was empty. But the symbols carved in the ground were glowing with a faint blue light. At the center of the circle sat a pile of old bones that hadn't been there before. "Human bones," Father McKenna whispered, kneeling down for a closer look. "Very old. And look at this." He pointed to something carved into the largest bone. It was a name, Bridget Bishop. I knew that name from history class. Bridget Bishop was the first person executed in the Salem witch trials. "This is impossible," I said. "She died in 1692. "Did she?" Father McKenna stood up and blessed himself. "These bones are old, Michael, but they're not ancient. It's like they've been preserved somehow." That's when we heard the singing. It was coming from deeper in the woods, toward the heart of Witch's Hollow. Women's voices, singing in harmony, but the tune was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. We followed the sound down a steep slope to a part of the forest I'd never seen before. Old-growth trees towered above us, their branches so thick they blocked out the moon. And in the center of a natural amphitheater formed by fallen logs and boulders, we saw them. 7 women in long dresses stood in a circle around a bonfire, but the fire was burning cold and blue, giving off no heat. 3 of the women looked young, teenagers in modern clothes. The other 4 were older, wearing dresses that looked like they came from colonial times. Sarah and Tim knelt at the edge of the fire, still staring straight ahead with those black eyes. "We have to help them," I whispered. Father McKenna grabbed my arm. "Wait, look closer." I focused on the older women and felt my blood turn to ice. Their skin was gray and sunken, like dried leather. Bones showed through tears in their clothes. These weren't living people. "They're dead," I breathed. "But still here," Father McKenna said. "Still hungry." One of the older women, the one who seemed to be leading the ceremony, turned toward our hiding spot. Even from 50 yards away, I could see her eyes glowing red in the darkness. "Michael Grimwood," she called out in a voice like rustling leaves. "Come and join us. Your knowledge of the sacred words would be most welcome." "How does she know my name?" I asked. "Demon's Key." "Now many things," Father McKenna said. "We need to disrupt their ceremony. If we can break their concentration, we might be able to save Sarah and Tim." "How?" He pulled out his leather book and opened it to a page marked with a red ribbon. "I'm going to start an exorcism. When I give you the signal, throw the holy water on their fire." We crept closer, using the trees for cover. The dead women continued their ceremony, but I could tell they knew we were there. The modern girls, Sarah and 2 others I didn't recognize, began chanting along with the older women. Father McKenna stood up and opened his book. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," he called out in a loud, clear voice. All 7 women turned toward us and hissed like angry cats. "Throw the water!" Father McKenna shouted. I ran toward the fire and emptied the bottle of holy water onto the blue flames. The fire exploded in a shower of sparks and steam. The dead women screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with wind through a graveyard. But instead of disappearing, they got angry. The leader pointed at me and spoke a word in a language that hurt to hear. Invisible hands grabbed me and lifted me off the ground. I hung in the air, unable to move, while the fire reignited itself. "You dare interfere with our congregation?" the dead woman said. "We have waited 3 centuries for enough servants to complete our work." Father McKenna kept reading from his book, but now the dead women were advancing on him. The modern girls, including Sarah, moved to surround him. "What work?" I managed to ask, still hanging in the air. The leader smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "To open the door, of course. To bring our sisters back from the place of burning. To make the whole world our congregation." That's when I understood. These weren't just random evil spirits. They were trying to bring back all the witches who had died in Salem, and probably everywhere else people had been executed for witchcraft. They wanted to create an army of the dead. And Halloween night was only 2 days away. The invisible hands holding me in the air started to squeeze. I could feel my ribs creaking under the pressure. Father McKenna was still chanting, but 3 of the possessed girls had reached him. Sarah grabbed his book and threw it into the fire. "No!" I shouted, watching the pages curl and burn, but Father McKenna just smiled. "Did you think I'd rely on just one book, Michael? I've been preparing for something like this for 30 years. He pulled out a silver crucifix and held it high. The dead women hissed and backed away, but they didn't flee. Instead, the leader laughed. "Your symbols have no power here, priest. This is our place, our time." "Maybe," Father McKenna said, "but it's not your world yet." The invisible hands dropped me suddenly. I hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The dead women were focused on Father McKenna now, advancing on him in a tight circle. That's when I remembered something from seminary. Father Donovan had told us about consecrating ground, making a place holy so that evil spirits couldn't enter it. But it required specific words and actions, and it had to be done by someone who truly believed. I crawled toward my backpack where I'd packed a second bottle of holy water. The dead women were too busy with Father McKenna to notice me. Sarah and the other possessed girls stood perfectly still like dolls waiting for orders. I unscrewed the cap on the holy water and tried to remember the Latin words for consecration. My seminary training felt like a lifetime ago, but slowly the phrases came back to me. Benedictio Dei Omnipotentis, I whispered, sprinkling water on the ground around me. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. A small circle of ordinary earth became sacred ground. The effect was immediate. I could breathe easier, and the oppressive cold lifted slightly. But it wasn't enough. The circle was too small, and the dead women were getting ready to kill Father McKenna. I needed to think bigger. The entire clearing sat in a natural bowl surrounded by 7 large stones. If I could reach each stone and consecrate it, I might be able to make the whole area holy ground. But that meant leaving my safe circle and running through a bunch of very angry undead witches. "Michael," Father McKenna called out. One of the dead women had her hands around his throat. "Whatever you're planning, do it now." I tucked the holy water into my jacket and sprinted toward the nearest stone. The leader of the witches saw me coming and pointed. The invisible hands grabbed for me again, but I dove and rolled, barely escaping their grip. I reached the first stone and splashed holy water on it while shouting the consecration prayer. The stone began to glow with a warm, golden light. "Stop him!" the leader screamed. Sarah and another girl ran toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural. I dodged Sarah and reached the second stone. More holy water, more prayer, more light. The dead women were shrieking now, a sound that made my teeth ache. But they were also getting weaker. I could see right through 2 of them. I ran to the third stone, then the fourth. The possessed girls tried to tackle me, but the growing light seemed to slow them down. By the time I reached the 5th stone, they were moving like they were underwater. At the 6th stone, the leader of the witches made one last desperate attack. She appeared right in front of me, her gray face twisted with rage. "You understand nothing," she hissed. "We are eternal. We are justice for those who burned." "Maybe," I said, splashing holy water on the stone. "But you're not welcome here." The 6th stone blazed with golden light. The leader screamed and began to fade. I ran to the 7th and final stone. As soon as the holy water touched it, the entire clearing filled with warm, bright light. The dead women disappeared like smoke. The possessed girls collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing normally. Father McKenna sat up slowly, rubbing his throat. "Well," he said hoarsely, "that was educational." Sarah opened her eyes and looked around in confusion. "Michael? What happened? Where am I?" Tim and the other girls were waking up too, all of them dazed and frightened, but alive. Normal. Human. "You've been sick," I told Sarah. "But you're better now." As we helped the kids to their feet, Father McKenna walked over to where the fire had been. Nothing remained but a circle of ash and 7 small piles of very old bones. "Are they gone?" I asked. He nodded. "For now. But Michael, you need to understand something. What we faced tonight wasn't destroyed. It was just sent away. These spirits have been gathering power for 300 years. They'll be back." "When?" "Next Halloween. And they'll be stronger, more prepared." He looked at the bones scattered around the clearing. "You might want to consider finishing your seminary training." The official report listed Sarah, Tim, and the other 2 girls as victims of a hallucinogenic drug ring operating in the national forest. The state police found traces of LSD and other chemicals at several campsites, which explained the strange behavior and memory gaps the teenagers experienced. No one mentioned the bones we'd found, which had crumbled to dust by the time the investigators arrived. No one talked about the carved symbols, which had mysteriously filled themselves in overnight. And certainly no one discussed undead colonial witches or supernatural possession. I kept quiet about what really happened, and Father McKenna backed up the official story. The kids were safe, their families were relieved, and the Forest Service's reputation remained intact. Sometimes the truth isn't worth the trouble it causes. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen and felt in that clearing. 2 weeks after Halloween, I submitted my resignation as a park ranger and drove back to St. Francis Seminary in Pittsburgh. "Welcome back, Michael," Father Donovan said when I showed up at his office. "What made you change your mind about the priesthood?" "Let's just say I've discovered that some of the things they taught us about good and evil are more real than I thought. I've been studying exorcism and spiritual warfare for 6 months now. The church has more cases than most people realize. Possessions, hauntings, unexplained phenomena that can't be dismissed as mental illness or fraud. After what happened at Witch's Hollow, I know this is the work I'm meant to do. Father McKenna visits sometimes. He's become something of a mentor, teaching me advanced techniques for dealing with supernatural threats. He's also shared some disturbing news about similar incidents in other parts of the country. Ancient evils stirring to life, old curses awakening, dead things that refuse to stay buried. It's like something big is coming, he told me last week. All across America, the spiritual barriers are weakening. Places that were sealed long ago are opening up again. I think about Witch's Hollow every day. According to Father McKenna, consecrated ground loses its power over time unless it's regularly renewed, which means that in a few years, maybe less, those witches will be able to return to their favorite spot. When they do, I'll be ready for them. Last week, I got a letter from the new park ranger at Allegheny National Forest. 3 hikers found animal sacrifices arranged in a pentagram near Witch's Hollow. The arrangements were more sophisticated this time, and the symbols were carved deeper. Halloween is still 5 months away, but they're already preparing. So am I. The thing that scares me most isn't the thought of facing those dead witches again. It's the knowledge that they were just one small group of spirits in one small corner of America. If Father McKenna is right, if the barriers really are weakening everywhere, then what happened in Witch's Hollow might just be the beginning. I keep a bag packed in my dormitory room. Holy water, blessed salt, silver crucifix, and a few other tools of the trade. When the call comes, and I know it will come, I'll be ready to go wherever evil spirits are threatening innocent people. After all, someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. Someone has to know the old words and remember the old ways. Someone has to believe. My name is Michael Grimwood, and I hunt monsters. The kind that used to be human, the kind that remember being burned, and the kind that are very, very patient. The next time you're hiking in the deep woods on a cold October night and you hear voices singing in a language you don't recognize, remember my story and run. My name is Elizabeth Holloway, and I've been a park ranger at Mammoth Cave for 9 years. I know every mapped tunnel, every safe passage, every place where the rock gets soft and the ceiling might come down. Cave rescue is my specialty. When people get lost in the dark, I'm the one who brings them home. That's why nobody believed Tommy Chen when he came stumbling out of the unmapped section that June morning in 1989, babbling about people living in the deep dark. "Ranger Holloway," he kept saying, grabbing my sleeve with dirty fingers. "There's people down there, lots of them, living in the caves." I sat him down at the ranger station and gave him water. Tommy was part of a 3-man mapping team from the university. Good kids, careful workers. But caves can mess with your head if you're not used to them. The darkness gets heavy after a while. Your brain starts filling in the empty spaces with things that aren't there. "Tell me what happened," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We found chambers," Tommy said. "Big ones, deeper than anything on the maps. And there were structures, like houses, but built into the rock. And people, Ranger Holloway. Pale people with big eyes, watching us from the shadows." I nodded and wrote it down. Classic cave hallucination, probably oxygen deprivation mixed with exhaustion. Where are the other two team members? Tommy's face went white. They stayed down there, said they wanted to document everything. I tried to make them come back, but they wouldn't listen. That was 2 days ago. 2 days. That changed everything. Even experienced cavers don't stay underground that long without resupply. I radioed for backup and started gathering rescue gear. The entrance to the unmapped section was a squeeze hole about 40 feet down the main passage. You had to belly crawl through 20 feet of limestone to reach the chambers beyond. Tommy had marked it with orange surveyor's tape. "I'm not going back down there," he said when I asked him to guide us. "That's okay," I told him. "You did good getting out to report it." But as I checked my equipment one more time, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. In 9 years of cave rescue, I'd seen a lot of things: equipment failure, panic attacks, hypothermia, broken bones from falls. But I'd never had someone describe structures built by people who weren't supposed to exist. The rational part of my brain said it was just geological formations that looked artificial in bad light. Limestone can create some wild shapes. Maybe the missing cavers had found something interesting and lost track of time. It happened more than people like to admit. But caves are old places, the kind of old that makes you feel small. And sometimes, in the deepest parts where no light has ever been, you get the feeling you're not alone. I clipped my headlamp to my helmet and checked the battery pack. Full charge, backup batteries in my pack. Rope, first aid kit, emergency food, water, standard rescue loadout. "Ready?" asked Jake Morrison, my backup for the day. Good man, solid caver. But he didn't know the unmapped areas like I did. "Ready," I said, and dropped into the squeeze hole. The rock was cold against my belly as I crawled through the narrow passage. My headlamp beam swept ahead, showing smooth limestone walls worn by centuries of water flow. No sign of the missing cavers yet. Then the passage opened up, and I understood why Tommy had been so shaken. The chamber was huge. My light couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling, but more importantly, there were definitely artificial structures carved into the rock. Shelves, alcoves, even what looked like steps leading deeper into the cave system. "Jesus," Jake breathed behind me. "Watch your language," I said automatically, but my ear was pounding. In all my years underground, I'd never seen anything like this. The air smelled wrong, too. Not the usual cave smell of damp rock and bat guano. This was organic, like a place where people had been living for a very long time. We followed the carved steps deeper into the system. My headlamp beam showed more structures as we descended. Elaborate shelving systems, fire-blackened areas that might have been hearths, even what looked like crude furniture carved from the living rock. "How old do you think this is?" Jake whispered. "I don't know," I said. But whoever had made these chambers knew cave engineering. The air circulation was perfect, despite being hundreds of feet underground. No carbon dioxide buildup, no humidity problems. It should have been impossible without modern ventilation systems. That's when my equipment started acting up. First, the electronic distance meter began giving impossible readings. Negative numbers, measurements that suggested we were somehow above ground level. Then Jake's radio started picking up static that sounded almost like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. "Probably just interference from the rock," I said, but I didn't believe it. We found the first evidence of recent habitation in what looked like a kitchen area. Modern camping gear mixed with crude stone tools. A Coleman lantern sitting next to a bowl carved from limestone. Fresh food, apples, bread, jerky, laid out on a natural stone table. "The missing cavers?" Jake suggested. "Maybe. But some of the gear looked older than 2 days. Sleeping bags with faded labels, equipment that hadn't been manufactured in years. Deeper in the chamber system, we found something that made my blood run cold. A nursery area with small alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove was lined with soft materials, moss, animal fur, strips of fabric. But the alcoves were sized for children, very small children, and some of the bedding was still warm. "Ranger Holloway," Jake said in a tight voice. "Look at this." He was standing near a wall covered in markings. Not quite writing, but definitely deliberate symbols carved into the stone. Among them were newer scratches that looked like, "Help us. They won't let us leave." Day 6. The handwriting was shaky, but clearly modern. One of the missing cavers. That's when we heard the whispers. At first I thought it was just air moving through hidden passages. Caves can make all kinds of sounds as temperature changes move air around. But these whispers had rhythm, patterns, like conversation, coming from deeper in the system. "We should call for backup," Jake said. I checked my radio. Dead. Not just static. Completely dead, like the battery had been drained. "Stay close," I told him. "We find the missing cavers and get out." But as we moved toward the sound of whispers, I noticed something that made my hands shake. Fresh scratches in the stone walls made by fingernails. Human fingernails, torn and bloody. The scratches led away from the nursery area and deeper into the cave system, like someone had been dragged against their will. The whispers got louder as we followed the trail. Multiple voices, speaking in perfect unison. The sound echoed off the chamber walls in ways that shouldn't have been possible, like it was coming from everywhere at once. My headlamp beam started to flicker. Brand new batteries, checked before the descent, but the light was definitely getting weaker. "Jake," I said, "give me your backup light." When I turned around, Jake was gone. I spun in a circle, my failing headlamp creating wild shadows on the chamber walls. "Jake! Jake!" My voice echoed back, but there was no response. He'd been right behind me 30 seconds ago. The narrow passage we'd used to enter the chamber was the only way in or out. Unless there were other passages, hidden ones. The whispers stopped all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The silence was somehow worse than the so and had been. My headlamp died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. Cave darkness isn't like any other kind of dark. It's complete, total, the kind of blackness that makes you question whether your eyes are open or closed. I fumbled for my backup light, hands shaking. Found it, clicked it on. The beam showed pale figures standing at the edge of my light, just at the boundary between visibility and shadow. Tall, thin, with skin so white it seemed to glow. Their eyes were huge, adapted for life in permanent darkness, and they were all looking at me. I've been in a lot of dangerous situations underground, cave-ins, flash floods, equipment failure miles from the surface. But I'd never experienced pure terror until that moment when a dozen pairs of huge, pale eyes stared at me from the darkness. My training kicked in. Stay calm, assess the situation, look for options. But every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The figures didn't move, just watched me with those enormous eyes. They looked human, but wrong. Like humans that had been stretched and changed by generations of life in absolute darkness. Their arms were too long, their heads too large, their skin translucent enough that I could see the dark network of veins underneath. One of them stepped forward. An elderly female, I thought, though it was hard to tell gender when they all looked so similar. She was wearing what might have been clothing once, scraps of fabric and leather sewn together with plant fibers. She spoke to me in whispers that sounded like wind through limestone passages. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. A question. I tried to speak and found my voice wouldn't work. Cleared my throat and tried again. "I'm looking for 2 people," I managed. 2 men who came down here yesterday." The pale woman tilted her head, listening. Then she spoke again, and this time I caught fragments of English mixed in with their strange whispered language. "Surface, people, cannot, leave." Other figures began emerging from passages I hadn't seen, me, moving with silent grace through the darkness. Men, women, children, an entire community that had somehow made these caves their home. But how long had they been down here? Some of their crude tools looked ancient, but others were clearly made from modern materials. Bits of metal, plastic, nylon rope, things that could only have come from the surface world. The elderly woman gestured for me to follow. Every rational part of my brain said to refuse, to back away, to try to find my way out. But Jake was missing, and the 2 cavers we'd come to rescue were somewhere in this underground maze. The passage she led me through was so narrow I had to turn sideways to fit. My light showed more carved alcoves, more evidence of long habitation, and something else. Bones. Human bones, old and new, arranged in careful patterns along the walls. Not random death. Ritual. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller, but filled with more of the pale cave dwellers. They sat in circles on the floor, sharing food from communal bowls. The food looked like mushrooms and roots, things that could grow in the perpetual darkness. But in the center of the chamber, tied to carved stone posts, were Jake and the two missing university students. They were alive, but changed. Their skin had already started to lose color, taking on the pale, translucent quality of the cave dwellers. Their eyes looked larger, pupils dilated wide to catch any available light. "Elizabeth," Jake called out weakly when he saw me. Don't let them feed you anything. It changes you." The elderly woman spoke to the others in their whispered language. I caught more English words this time. Keeper, guardian, surface poison. One of the university students, a young man with a scraggly beard, looked at me with eyes that seemed too large for his face. "They don't want to hurt us," he said. "They re-protecting us. The surface world is toxic. Poison air, poison water, poison light. They're saving us from all that. By keeping you prisoner? By keeping us pure." His voice had taken on the same whispered quality as the cave dwellers. "We were sick up there, Elizabeth. Sick from breathing contaminated air, from eating processed food, from living under that burning sun. Down here, we can be clean again." The elderly woman approached me, holding out a bowl filled with some kind of stew. The smell was organic, earthy, not entirely unpleasant. But Jake's warning echoed in my head. "No, thank you," I said. Her expression didn't change, but she continued to hold out the bowl. Around the chamber, the other cave dwellers had stopped eating and were watching the interaction intently. "You must eat," the bearded student said. "If you don't eat their food, they'll think you're trying to stay connected to the surface world. They'll think you're a threat to the community." "What happens then?" He gestured toward the bone arrangements along the walls. "They protect the community from threats." The elderly woman stepped closer, still offering the bowl. Her whispered words were more urgent now, and I caught fragments. Choose, join, or... The last word was in their language, but I understood it from context. The alternative to joining their community wasn't going home. It was becoming part of those bone arrangements. My backup light was starting to dim. I had maybe an hour of illumination left, and finding the way out of this maze in complete darkness would be impossible, even if I could convince them to let me leave, which was looking increasingly unlikely. The cave dwellers had begun to move, surrounding me in a loose circle, not threatening exactly, but definitely preventing any easy escape. Their pale faces were patient, almost kind, but there was something inexorable about their presence, like they'd had this conversation before with other surface visitors, and like they always got the same result. The elderly woman set the bowl down and spoke in clear English for the first time. "We were like you once," she said, "children of the burning sky, breathers of poison air. We came to these caves fleeing wars, fleeing sickness, fleeing the madness of the surface world." "When?" I asked. "Time moves differently in the deep places. Some of us came during the Great War between the states, others during the wars across the ocean, still others more recently, seeking peace from the chaos above." She gestured to the bearded student. "Thomas came to us seeking knowledge. Robert came seeking escape from surface pressures. They found something better. They found home. They found prison," I said. Her large eyes regarded me with something like pity. "The surface world is the prison, child. We have learned to be free." Around the chamber, more cave dwellers had gathered. I realized I was seeing multiple generations. The elderly ones with the most extreme adaptations, younger ones who still retained some surface human characteristics, and children who looked barely human at all. An entire civilization, hidden beneath the earth. We are not cruel, the woman continued. We give choices. Join our community and live in peace, or... She gestured toward the bone arrangements. Remain surface-connected and become a danger to our children. What about just leaving? I asked. What about going back the way I came? Impossible. The path is sealed. It seals itself when surface dwellers penetrate too deeply into our domain. I thought about the squeeze hole we'd use to enter. If they'd somehow blocked that passage, Jake and I would never have enough air to clear the obstruction. We'd die trying. But you could unseal it, I said. We could, if we chose to. The implication was clear. Join them or die. I looked at Jake, still tied to the stone post. His skin was definitely paler than it had been an hour ago, and his eyes reflected my light, but like an animal's. How long does the change take? I asked. Not long, the bearded student said. A few days of breathing clean air, eating pure food, living without the poison of artificial light. The body remembers what it was meant to be. And if someone wanted to go back to the surface after the change started? The elderly woman's expression grew sad. The clean air becomes necessary. Surface air burns the lungs. Surface light burns the skin. There is no going back once the body has begun to heal. I understood now why Tommy had been able to leave. He'd only been in the caves for hours, not days. Not long enough for the change to take hold. But Jake and the university students had been down here long enough for the process to begin. Even if I could get them out, they might not survive on the surface. My light was definitely dimmer now. Maybe 30 minutes left. I need time to think, I said. Time is something we have in abundance, the woman replied. But light is not. Choose quickly, child of the burning sky. The cave dwellers waited with inhuman patience as I considered my options. I could try to fight my way out, but there were dozens of them and only one of me. I could try to find another exit, but my light would die long before I navigated the maze of passages. Or I could accept their offer and spend the rest of my life in the deep darkness, slowly changing into something that was no longer quite human. I thought about my life on the surface, my job, my apartment, my few friends. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't particularly fulfilling either. The cave dwellers seemed genuinely peaceful, content in their underground world. But they were still holding people against their will. If I join you, I said carefully, what happens to my friends? They remain as they are, part of our community. And if someone from the surface comes looking for us? The passages have been sealed before. They can be sealed again. More people would disappear. More families would lose sons and daughters to the deep hollow places. The cycle would continue. I made my decision. I'll stay, I said. But first I want to understand how your community works. I want to see everything. The elderly woman smiled, and her two large teeth gleamed in my fading light. Of course, she said. Welcome home. But as she turned to lead me deeper into the cave system, I palmed the small emergency flare from my rescue kit, standard equipment designed to burn for 15 minutes with intense white light. If the cave dwellers were as sensitive to bright light as they appeared to be, one flare might be enough to create the distraction I needed. The question was whether I could get Jake and the others out before my betrayal got us all killed. The woman led me toward a passage that sloped even deeper into the earth. Other cave dwellers followed, their pale forms moving silently through the darkness. My light flickered and died. In the absolute blackness, I pulled the pin on the flare. The brilliant white light exploded through the chamber like a miniature sun, and the cave dwellers' screams echoed off the limestone walls like the sounds of 1,000 breaking voices. The flare burned with such intensity that even I had to squint against its glare. The cave dwellers scattered like moths, their pale skin actually smoking in the harsh light. Their screams were horrible, not just pain, but genuine anguish, like the light was burning away something essential. I ran to Jake and cut his bonds with my rescue knife. He was weak but mobile, his surface world conditioning not yet completely erased. The students, he gasped. But when I reached them, I realized the truth. They'd been down here too long. The bright light was hurting them almost as much as it was hurting the cave dwellers. Their adapted eyes couldn't handle surface intensity illumination. "Please," the bearded one whispered. "Turn it off. It burns." They weren't prisoners anymore. They were converts. I had to make a choice. Save the people who could still be saved, or try to rescue people who might die from exposure to the surface world. "Can you walk?" I asked. "Jake." He nodded, squinting against the flare light. The elderly woman cowered against the far wall, her pale skin blistered and red. But she spoke through the pain. "You cannot take him. The change has begun." She was right. Even in the flare light, I could see that Jake's skin had lost its normal color. His eyes were oversized, pupils completely dilated. But he was still Jake. Still human enough to choose. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. The flare was already half burned. In a few minutes, we'd be back in absolute darkness with a community of very angry cave dwellers. I found the passage we'd used to enter, praying the cave dwellers hadn't actually sealed it. The squeeze hole was still open, but barely. Someone had been pushing rocks into the opening. Jake went first, crawling through the narrow space with desperate energy. I followed, the flare's light fading behind us. We made it to the main cave system just as the flare burned out. In the familiar mapped passages, my spare light was enough to guide us to the surface. We emerged into blazing June sunlight, and Jake collapsed immediately. The surface air was poison to his adapted lungs, and the sunlight raised blisters on his pale skin. But he was alive. I radioed for medical backup and told a carefully edited version of events. Unmapped cave system, dangerous conditions. University students chose to remain for extended research. Jake was suffering from oxygen deprivation and exposure. The official report listed the deep chambers as geologically unstable and permanently sealed the entrance with concrete. The university was told their students had died in a cave-in, their bodies unrecoverable. Jake survived, but he was never the same. The partial adaptation to cave life left him with light sensitivity and respiratory problems. He resigned from the Park Service. He had moved to Alaska, where the winter nights were long and dark. I kept working at Mammoth Cave, but I was different too. I'd seen what lay beneath the mapped world, and I knew it was still there. The concrete seal wouldn't stop the cave dwellers from finding other ways to the surface. Sometimes, late at night, I get reports of people disappearing near cave systems throughout Kentucky and Tennessee. Experienced cavers who enter unmapped passages and never come out. Each time I think about the pale faces in the darkness and wonder if another community has been discovered, or if the communities are growing. I never told anyone the full truth about what happened in the deep, hollow places. Who would believe it? But I know the cave dwellers are still down there, still welcoming lost souls who stumble into their domain, still protecting their children from the poison light of the surface world. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the caves whisper with moving air, I wonder if they were right. If the surface world really is the prison, and the deep darkness really is home. But I stay above ground, in the burning light, keeping watch. Because someone has to guard the boundaries between the world we know and the world that waits beneath our feet. Someone has to make sure the deep, hollow things stay in the deep, hollow places. Even if part of me will always wonder what it would have been like to let the darkness welcome me home. My name is Thomas Brightwater, and I've been a park ranger at Cherokee National Forest for 16 years. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was October 15th, 1967, and the leaves were at their peak. Orange and red covered the hills like a giant quilt. Perfect weather for the school field trip that was supposed to visit Bell Witch Cave that morning. I was checking trail markers when my radio crackled to life. "Thomas, we got a problem." It was my boss, Daniel Moonhorse. His voice sounded tight. "Got a school bus sitting empty on Ridge Road. Engines still running, but no kids anywhere." I felt my stomach drop. "How many kids?" 12. plus their teacher, Miss Harper. Bus driver says he stopped to check a flat tire. When he looked up, everyone was gone. I grabbed my gear and hiked down to the road. The yellow bus sat there like a metal tomb, its door hanging open. The engine hummed quietly. Inside, lunchboxes and backpacks were scattered on the seats. Some still had half-eaten sandwiches, but the kids were gone. They must have wandered off, the bus driver said. He was a thin man with shaky hands. Kids do that, right? See something interesting and just walk away? I nodded, but something felt wrong. In 16 years, I'd never seen kids leave their food behind, and the forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels. Even the wind had stopped. We'll find them, I told the driver. Kids get lost up here all the time. I started walking toward the tree line, looking for signs. Broken branches, footprints, anything. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Faint and far away, but definitely children laughing. It seemed to come from the direction of Bell Witch Cave, about half a mile through the woods. I followed a deer path toward the sound. The temperature started dropping with each step. By the time I reached the cave entrance, I could see my breath. That was strange. It had been 70 degrees at the bus. Bell Witch Cave was nothing special to look at. Just a dark hole in the limestone cliff, maybe 6 feet wide. The state had put up a metal gate years ago to keep tourists out. Too many people had gotten lost in the tunnels inside, but the gate was open. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave stretched back into darkness, splitting into 3 tunnels about 20 feet in. I knew these caves better than anyone. I'd done dozens of rescues here over the years. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone in here?" My voice echoed back, but underneath the echo, I heard something else. Whispering, like kids sharing secrets. I picked the middle tunnel and started walking. The walls were covered in old scratches and carvings. Most were just names and dates from curious visitors. But some looked different. Older, deeper, and some looked fresh. I stopped and aimed my light at the wall. There, carved into the limestone, were words in a child's handwriting. "Come play with us." The letters were still white, newly cut. My radio buzzed. "Thomas, you find anything?" "Maybe," I said. "I'm in the cave, found some fresh carvings. Be careful in there, and hurry. Those kids have been missing for 2 hours now." I kept walking deeper into the tunnel. The whispering got louder. Sometimes it sounded like my name. Sometimes it sounded like Cherokee words my grandmother used to say. Words I hadn't heard since I was little. The tunnel opened into a bigger room. I'd been here before, but something was different. The air felt thick, heavy, and cold enough that my flashlight beam showed white puffs of my breath. That's when I saw the shoes. 12 pairs of children's shoes arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the room. Sneakers and saddle shoes and little boots, all facing inward, like the kids had been, and standing there holding hands. But no kids. I stepped closer and felt something crunch under my feet. Glass. I looked down and saw my flashlight lens had cracked. The light flickered and dimmed. In the growing darkness, I heard a new sound. Footsteps, small ones, running deeper into the cave. "Wait!" I called out. "I'm here to help!" But the footsteps were already fading into the black tunnels ahead. I had 2 choices: go back for backup and better equipment, or follow those footsteps before the trail went cold. The kids had been missing for 2 hours. Every minute counted. I followed the sound into the darkness, and that's when things got really strange. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My breath came out in thick white clouds. The walls started changing too. Instead of rough limestone, they felt smooth, almost polished, and they were warm to the touch, even though the air was freezing. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. The tunnel curved to the left and opened into another room. This one was bigger than the first, with a high ceiling that disappeared into blackness above. Stalactites hung down like teeth, and covering the walls were handprints. Hundreds of them. Small hands pressed into the stone, leaving perfect white prints. Some looked old and faded. Others looked fresh, like wet paint. I walked closer and realized they spelled out words, letter after letter made from tiny handprints. Stay and play. My flashlight flickered again and went out completely. In the total darkness, I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Thomas Brightwater. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. A woman's voice, but old, ancient, speaking with an accent I couldn't place. You know who I am, the voice continued. Your grandmother told you stories. Singing Bird warned you about the woman who takes children. My blood went cold. Grandmother Singing Bird had told me stories about Bell Witch when I was little. But those were just tales to keep kids from wandering into dangerous places, weren't they? Where are the children? I asked the darkness. Laughter echoed around me. Not the woman's laughter, children's laughter, dozens of kids giggling and whispering. They're safe, the woman's voice said. They're playing. They'll play forever. A dim light appeared ahead. Not electric light. Something else. Blue and cold, like moonlight on snow. It showed me a tunnel I'd never seen before, even though I'd mapped every inch of this cave system. I had no choice but to follow it. The tunnel sloped downward for what felt like miles. The blue light stayed just ahead of me, leading me deeper. The children's voices got louder, laughing, singing, playing games. But underneath their happy sounds, I heard something else. Crying, quiet sobbing that broke my heart. The tunnel ended at a vast underground chamber. The blue light came from everywhere and nowhere, showing me things that shouldn't exist. There were the 12 missing children. They sat in a circle on the stone floor, holding hands and singing a song I'd never heard. Their eyes were closed, and they swayed back and forth like they were hypnotized. But they looked wrong, too pale. Their clothes hung loose like they'd lost weight, and they were see-through. I could see the cave wall right through them. Miss Harper? I called out. Their teacher sat behind them, but she wasn't singing. She was crying. When she looked up at me, her eyes were full of terror. She won't let us leave, Miss Harper whispered. She says we have to stay and play with her children. What children? Miss Harper pointed behind me. I turned around and saw them. Dozens of other kids. Some wearing clothes from the 1800s, some from the early 1900s, some from just a few years ago. All of them pale and see-through. All of them staring at me with empty eyes. And standing in the middle of them was the woman. She was tall and thin, wearing a long black dress that looked like it came from Civil War times. Her hair hung in stringy gray ropes around her face. When she smiled, I saw too many teeth. Thomas Brightwater, she said, Singing Bird's grandson. I've been waiting for you. Let the children go, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But they're having such fun, she said. Look how happy they are. The 12 missing kids kept singing their strange song. Their voices sounded far away, like they were calling from the bottom of a well. They want to stay, the woman continued. Just like all my other children wanted to stay. We play such wonderful games down here. Hide and seek in the tunnels. Tag in the dark. Red Rover with chains that never break. The other ghost children giggled and clapped their hands. But their laughter sounded hollow, empty. Who are you? I asked. I think you know, she said. Your grandmother told you about the woman who lost her children on the Trail of Tears. How she searched for them until she died. How she still searches. My mouth went dry. Kate Batts, the Bell Witch. She smiled wider. I found children to replace the ones that were taken from me. So many children over the years. They love it here. They never grow up. They never leave me. The temperature dropped even more. Ice started forming on the walls. But I'm always looking for special children, she continued. Children with the old blood. Cherokee children who know the old ways. She pointed at the 12 missing kids. These will do nicely, but I think I want you too, Thomas. You have your grandmother's gift. You can see things others cannot. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but ghost children moved to block my way. Their touch felt like ice water. "You can't leave," Kate Batts said. "None of you can leave. We're going to play forever." The walls of the chamber started closing in. Not physically, but I felt trapped, stuck, like the air itself was turning solid around me. That's when I remembered something Grandmother Singing Bird had taught me, something I'd forgotten until this moment. She'd told me how to fight things like this. "Grandmother," I whisper, yet in Cherokee. "Help me remember." Kate Batts heard me, and her smile faded. "The old words won't work here, boy. This is my place now." But I was already reaching into my pocket for something I always carried, a small pouch of tobacco and sage that Grandmother Singing Bird had given me years ago. I'd kept it more for memory than belief. "In Cherokee," I said louder, "we have rules about spirits who steal children." I opened the pouch and scattered some of the mixture on the ground. The scent filled the air. Kate Batts stepped back like I'd thrown acid at her. "Stop," she hissed. The ghost children started wailing. Not happy sounds anymore. Sounds of pain and fear. "Grandmother told me about you," I continued, speaking in Cherokee now. "You're not Cherokee. You're a white woman's spirit wearing our sacred mountain like a coat. You don't belong here." I scattered more sage. Kate Batts's form flickered like a TV with bad reception. "But these children do belong somewhere," I said. "They belong with their families." The 12 missing kids stopped singing. Their eyes opened, and they looked around confused, like they were waking up from a dream. "Miss Harper," I called out, "can you walk?" I think so," she said, standing up shakily. "Get the kids and move toward me. Slowly." But Kate Batts wasn't finished. She raised her arms and the whole chamber shook. Rocks fell from the ceiling. The blue light got brighter and colder. "You will not take my children," she screamed. The ghost children from other years started moving toward us, dozens of them, their faces twisted with hunger and desperation. I threw more sage, but it was running low, and the ghost kids kept coming. "Thomas!" Miss Harper screamed. I looked back and saw that the 12 missing children were changing again, getting pale and see-through like the others. Kate Batts was pulling them back into her spell, T. That's when I realized what I had to do. Grandmother Singing Bird had told me about Cherokee spirit rules, about trading one thing for another, about balance. "Kate Batts!" I shouted. "I'll make you a deal." She stopped chanting and looked at me. "What kind of deal?" "You want Cherokee children because they have the old blood, the old memories." I pulled out my ranger badge and threw it on the ground. "Take my memories instead, all of them. Everything Grandmother Singing Bird taught me about the old ways." "Thomas, no," Miss Harper cried. But I kept talking. "My memories for their freedom. All 12 kids plus your other ghost children. Let them all go home." Kate Batts studied me with those hollow eyes. "Your memories of the old ways are precious," she said. "They connect you to your ancestors. Without them, you'll be just another white man in a uniform." "I know," I said. "But kids are more important than memories." She smiled, that terrible smile. "I accept." The air around me started spinning. I felt something being pulled out of my head. Memories of Grandmother Singing Bird teaching me Cherokee words. Stories about spirits and sacred places. Knowledge about plants and animals and the way the world really worked. All of it flowing out of me and into Kate Batts. The 12 missing children started looking solid again. Color returned to their faces. The ghost children from other years started fading away, but they looked peaceful now, free. "Go," one of the ghost children whispered to me as she disappeared. "Thank you." But something went wrong. Kate Batts started laughing, but it turned into screaming. The memories I'd given her were burning her up from the inside. Cherokee knowledge and white woman spirit didn't mix. "What did you do?" she shrieked. Grandmother Singing Bird was smart, I said, feeling weaker as more memories left me. She taught me protection along with everything else. You took the knowledge, but you also took the safeguards. Kate Batts was coming apart. Her form flickered and twisted. The chamber shook harder. "Run!" I yelled to Miss Harper and the kids. But the tunnels were collapsing. Rocks blocked every exit. We were trapped. Kate Batts made one last, desperate grab for the children, but the Cherokee protections in my memories held her back. She dissolved into smoke and shadow, screaming as she disappeared. The blue light went out. In the darkness, I heard water, a stream running somewhere nearby. I remembered what Grandmother Singing Bird had said about spirits and running water. "This way," I called out, following the sound. We crawled through a crack in the wall and found ourselves in a narrow passage with a small stream running through it. The water glowed faintly in the dark. We followed the stream upward for what felt like hours. The kids were tired and scared, but they kept moving. Miss Harper helped the smaller ones. Finally, we saw daylight ahead. We came out of the cave through a crack in the rocks about a mile from where I'd gone in. Daniel Moonhorse and a search team were waiting for us. "Where have you been?" Daniel asked. "You've been missing for 6 hours." 6 hours. It had felt like minutes. The kids didn't remember much. They said they'd followed Miss Harper into the cave to explore. Then everything was fuzzy until they woke up in the dark. Miss Harper looked at me with knowing eyes. She remembered everything, but she never told anyone what really happened. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much I'd lost in that cave. I couldn't remember most of the Cherokee words Grandmother Singing Bird had taught me. The stories about spirits and sacred places were gone. When I tried to recall her voice teaching me about plants and animals, there was just empty space. But I'd saved 12 children's lives. That had to count for something. I threw myself into my work, trying to forget about Bell Witch Cave. But the forest felt different now, quieter, like something important had gone out of it. Then, 3 weeks later, Daniel Moonhorse came to see me. "We got another missing kid," he said. 8-year-old boy from Gatlinburg, last seen heading toward the cave area. My blood went cold. I thought Kate Batts was gone. So did I. But maybe we were wrong. We found the boy's backpack near the cave entrance. The metal gate was open again. I stood at the entrance, looking into the darkness. I couldn't feel the presence I'd felt before. Kate Batts was truly gone. But something else was in there now. Something smaller. Weaker. "Hello?" I called into the cave. A child's voice answered. "Please help me. I'm lost." Not the boy from Gatlinburg. A different voice. Older. I went into the cave with my flashlight and better equipment this time. In the main chamber, I found a ghost child I hadn't seen before. A little Cherokee girl wearing traditional dress. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Little Dove," she said. "I've been lost for so long." "Where's the boy from Gatlinburg?" "I sent him home," she said. "He was too scared to stay, but I wanted to talk to you first." I knelt down to her level. "What do you want to tell me?" "The bad woman is gone," Little Dove said. "But children still get lost in these mountains. They need someone to guide them home." "I don't understand." "You gave away your grandmother's memories to save the other children," she said. "That was brave. But the mountains need someone who remembers the old ways." She reached out and touched my forehead with her small, cold hand. Suddenly, all the memories came flooding back. Everything Grandmother Singing Bird had taught me. Every story, every word, every piece of ancient wisdom. But they felt different now. Deeper, like they'd been tested and proven true. "How?" I asked. "Kate Batts only stole the surface memories," Little Dove explained. "The real knowledge was buried deeper. Your grandmother hid it where spirits couldn't reach." She started to fade away. "Take care of the children who get lost. Help them find their way home. That's your job now." And then she was gone. That was 40 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live near Cherokee National Forest. Still keep an eye on Bell Witch Cave. Kids don't disappear there anymore. Not like they used to. But sometimes they get lost, wander off hiking trails, fall into hidden sinkholes, get turned around in the thick woods. And when they do, I'm there to help them find their way home. I've learned things over the years. The cave system connects to dozens of other caves throughout the mountains. There are spirits down there, but most of them are good. Lost souls like Little Dove who help instead of hurt. Kate Batts was different. She was angry and hurt and full of grief over her own lost children. That made her dangerous. But she's gone now, and the mountains are safer. I teach Cherokee children about the old ways when their parents let me. Pass on what Grandmother Singing Bird taught me. Make sure the knowledge doesn't die out. And sometimes, late at night, I still go down into Bell Witch Cave. Not because I have to, because I want to. There are other spirits down there now. Good spirits. Cherokee ancestors who watch over the mountain. Children like Little Dove who guide lost souls to safety. The cave isn't a prison anymore. It's a sanctuary. But I still warn people to be careful, to stay on marked trails, to travel in groups, to respect the old places and the old stories. Because while Kate Batts is gone, the mountains hold other mysteries, other dangers for those who aren't prepared. My name is Thomas Brightwater, and I'm the guardian of Bell Witch Cave, and I'll keep watching over these mountains until someone else is ready to take my place. The children deserve to be safe, all of them.